I divorced my husband because he cheated on me 3 years ago with my younger sister. When I received their wedding invitation, it felt like a double betrayal, especially when my mother said she would attend the ceremony. Feeling betrayed by everyone close to me, my mother cryptically added, "I'll do something fun, you just wait and see." Determined to exact my own justice, Aita, who had once trained and guided him at our shared workplace where I was his boss, devised a plan. Initially, he had been nervous and uncertain in his role, but over time, our relationship grew beyond professional. His proposal came after he excelled in his job and won praise from our superiors. Our wedding went smoothly, and even my sister Kate, who had quickly befriended him, praised his kindness and ambition. However, after about a year of marriage, he began arriving home late, avoiding conversations about work, and spending less time with me. Feeling neglected, I suggested a spa getaway, hoping to reconnect. "I've booked a spa trip for us next month," I told him one day, hoping to rekindle our relationship. "Huh. Oh, is that next week?" he replied absent-mindedly. "I forgot to mention, I have to go on a business trip next weekend." "What? But you've known about the spa trip for quite some time." "Well, it's work, so it can't be helped." "I see." Liam's apartment seemed busier than ever with frequent business trips. It appeared I had no choice but to give up on our spa plans this time as well. As always, Liam left early the next morning for his business trip. If things had gone as planned, we would have been heading to the spa together by now, I thought, feeling disappointed. Just then, the hotel called. Despite my cancellation email, they hadn't received it due to an error and called to confirm our arrival time. That's right, maybe I'll invite Kate, I considered, dialing my parents' house. Unfortunately, Kate had been out all morning and wouldn't be back. As a last resort, I decided to invite my mother to the spa. Compared to my sister, I half expected Mom to decline on such short notice, but to my surprise, she agreed. "Really? Is it okay to leave Dad alone?" I asked. "Right now, I'm more worried about you than your father," she replied, sensing my recent low spirits and deciding to accompany me on the trip. "Thanks, Mom," I said gratefully. "I'm the one who should be thanking you. I'm happy we could take this trip together like this," I told my mother gratefully. It had been a long time since we had enjoyed a trip together. However, upon arriving at the hotel, my mother and I witnessed something shocking. "Mom, look at that," I whispered, pointing discreetly. There, at the hotel entrance, was Liam. He was supposed to be on his business trip, but he appeared happy, arm in arm with another woman as they entered the hotel where we were supposed to stay. "You've got to be kidding," I murmured in disbelief. The woman with Liam turned briefly in our direction. It was Kate, my own sister. After that moment, I was in a state of shock and barely remembered how we got back home. My mother made me some tea and slowly, my feelings began to calm. He had been deceiving me, I finally realized aloud, feeling betrayed not only by Liam but also by Kate. After regaining my composure, I called Liam's department. As suspected, they hadn't sent him on any recent business trips. In fact, they had been reducing workloads and avoiding overtime for years. When Liam came home late or was supposedly on business trips, Kate wasn't home either. I explained to my mother, who listened quietly. So, all those times he was meeting Kate, I concluded bitterly. Filled with anger rather than sadness, I made a decision. "Mother, I'm going to divorce Liam. I can't bear to see Kate right now, so I won't be visiting the house for a while," I declared firmly. My mother remained silent, understanding my emotions completely. "I'll prepare everything before Liam comes back," I added, determined to take control of the situation. I had already prepared the divorce papers, signed a lease for a new apartment where I could live temporarily before moving into my new house, and packed all my belongings. Leaving Liam's letter along with the divorce papers at our former home, I made it clear that all matters regarding alimony and legalities would be handled by my lawyer, and then proceeded to block all communication from him. To keep my new address confidential, I didn't inform my parents, despite working in the same company where we occasionally crossed paths. Each time, I chose to ignore him completely. Seeing the futility of the situation, Liam quickly agreed to the divorce. He didn't disclose the reasons to our colleagues, but they seemed to sense the situation and respected my privacy, avoiding the topic of our divorce entirely. 3 years passed with me keeping my distance not only from Liam, but also from my family. One evening after returning from work, I found my mother waiting for me in my apartment. "Mom, what's wrong?" I asked, surprised. I have something to tell you, she said quietly, handing me an invitation. This is from Liam and Kate, she explained. It turned out that Kate had left our family home and moved in with Liam. I thought they might get married, but I never expected them to have a wedding ceremony and invite our parents. So, Mom, are you going? I asked hesitantly. Of course I am, she replied calmly. I see. I was the only one who couldn't forgive the two of them yet. Clearly, they must have known, which was why they invited only our parents to the wedding. I felt I had no right to say anything, having distanced myself from both Liam and my parents. Seeing my sadness, my mother smiled reassuringly and said, Don't worry, I'm not going because I forgive them. Just you wait and watch. On the day of the wedding, my mother called me via video. I don't want to see their faces, I murmured, tempted to end the call. But then I recalled my mother's earlier words and stayed connected. The screen displayed a slideshow in progress. The MC began introducing the slides. This slideshow was made by the bride's mother, the MC explained. She gathered photos from her beloved daughter's birth to the present and created this presentation. I was surprised that my mother, who wasn't particularly tech-savvy, had managed to create such a heartfelt slideshow. Yet it stirred up a mix of emotions within me. Mom, you went to this much effort for Kate, I questioned sadly. But in the next moment, I found myself captivated by what appeared on the screen. This isn't Kate, I realized aloud. The slideshow had begun with a photo of me. When she was born, so cute. There's a resemblance, remarked the guests as they watched with a relaxed atmosphere. Kate's expression, however, stiffened as the MC continued. Since she was young, the bride has always been devoted to her family. She was a diligent student who successfully entered her desired university. After starting her job, she became a very reliable employee at the company, the MC narrated. Kate's friends and colleagues, who knew about her student days and workplace, began to buzz with excitement. Hey, isn't that a photo from the welcome party at university? Kate didn't go to such a good university, did she? Wait, isn't that a photo from the company's welcome party? Wait a minute, looking closely, it's completely different. If this isn't Kate. Liam also seemed to have noticed. What the hell is this? This isn't Kate. Unaware of the bride and groom's pale faces, the MC continued advancing the slides. And then she met the groom, Liam, at the company. According to the bride's mother, she initially taught and trained the groom as his instructor. Then the two got married. Photos from Emma's wedding with Liam followed. The MC couldn't hide their confusion. Realizing something was wrong, they fell silent. At that moment, my mother took the stage and grabbed the microphone. From here on, I'll take over and explain, she announced smoothly, advancing the slides. Even after marriage, my daughter supported him both personally and professionally. However, as Liam got busier, he couldn't find time for her, so my daughter planned a spa trip to help relieve his stress. Wait, please, Liam tried to interject, but my mother ignored him, continuing with the slides. The next photo showed them entering the spa hotel together, very close to each other. Finally, photos of the bride and groom appeared, silencing both the MC and the guests. However, Liam and Kate grew even paler. Liam declined the trip planned by my daughter due to a business trip, my mother continued, saying it couldn't be helped that he had to go for work. My daughter invited me to the spa trip, and that's where we witnessed his affair. With those words, everyone started talking and buzzing about what my mother had revealed. An affair? And this wedding is for Kate and Liam, right? Could it be that this wedding is based on their affair? But why would Kate's mother? To answer the guests' questions, my mother continued slowly. Liam swore to marry my beloved daughter Emma and make her happy. Instead, he betrayed her. To make matters worse, he cheated on Emma with her own sister Kate. Mother, stop it already. Today is my wedding day. Why won't you celebrate my happiness? Kate cried out, trying to stop her mother. But my mother coldly looked at Kate and said, I have always wished for your happiness, but you were the one who ruined it first. My mother-in-law's voice was stern. Emma always considered not only herself but also the happiness of her family. What about you, Kate? Have you ever thought about how much Emma would be hurt by your actions? Well, Kate hesitated, looking uncomfortable. She always seems so happy. It's not fair. Instead of being happy for your family, you just got jealous, huh? Mother-in-law, please stop. She is your precious daughter too, right? If that's the case, can't you celebrate our new beginning? Kate pleaded. Why are you doing this? I don't want to become family with someone as dishonest as you. I saw it clearly at today's ceremony. My mother's voice grew more assertive. If you really intend to start something with Kate, why didn't you invite a single person from your own company? If you're going to have such a grand ceremony, shouldn't you apologize to Emma? It's selfish to invite me and her father to the wedding without making any effort like that. But Emma has been ignoring me all this time, Liam interjected defensively. Of course she has. After what you've done, it's only natural, my mother retorted sharply. But that's all in the past, isn't it? Do you think her wounds will heal in just 3 years? Do you think you can regain our trust in such a short time? Don't be ridiculous. My mother concluded with finality. After those words, my mother angrily left the venue with my father. I could hear her voice from the cell phone. Did you see that, Emma? Yes, I replied quietly. I'm sorry for reminding you of painful things. I just can't stand seeing those two act like nothing happened. No, thank you. I feel relieved. It's like you said everything I wanted to say. That's right, Emma. You always keep everything to yourself. I thought it was just too kind of you to not tell your colleagues the reason for your divorce. After that, my mother sent me a recording of her conversation with Liam during the wedding. Indeed, as my mother said, even if time passes, it's not easy to forget. Moreover, Liam showed no signs of remorse whatsoever, calling it a thing of the past. I decided to begin my second life by giving Liam a fitting punishment. I chose to confront him during a company presentation. The opportunity arose during a company-wide presentation where volunteers from various departments could participate. Swiftly signing up, I entered the conference room. When it was Liam's turn to speak, his supervisor, unaware of his remarriage, commented, "Liam, you seem even more motivated today. Must be because you just got married." "Yes, I will do my best for my family," Liam replied, sounding genuinely happy. He should have known I was present, but that only strengthened my resolve. I played the recorded audio I received from my mother. The sudden noise from the audio surprised the participants, but as they learned about Liam's affair with my sister after marrying me, accusations began to fly. "Liam, didn't you claim the reason for our divorce was a difference in values?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Oh, really? Well, I can't understand a value that involves cheating with your own wife's sister." I apologize for bringing personal matters into this important presentation, I continued. As of today, I have decided to resign. I have tolerated being in this company because I value it, but I can no longer work in the same place as him. As I moved to leave, the board members intervened to stop me. "Wait a minute, Emma," one of them spoke up. "You're an invaluable asset to our company. If anyone should leave, it should be Liam." "But I've always been seen as having a promising future here," I protested. "We had high expectations for you in the past, but lately, your performance has declined. Your focus has waned, and it seems you've lost the problem-solving abilities you once had," another board member explained. Meanwhile, Kate, who had been incompetent with household chores even when living with her parents, became a full-time housewife after marrying Liam. She left most of the housework to him, causing him stress at work. Unable to offer him the support I once could, his performance suffered further. News of his affair with his wife's sister spread throughout the company, tarnishing his reputation. During the board meeting, it was decided that I would stay at the company while Liam would be transferred to a remote location with the likelihood of being laid off in the future. Kate, who had enjoyed a comfortable life as a housewife with Liam's support, abandoned him when she discovered his financial troubles. She moved on to another man, only to find out he was a freeloader burdened with debts. Now, she works 2 jobs day and night to make ends meet. As the saying goes, what goes around comes around. Watching Liam and Kate struggle, I finally felt ready to start anew. 3.5
Hello, I'm Sharon, a 26-year-old high school teacher. I've always believed in the quiet magic of everyday life, a belief that seemed to hold true until I met Alex. Our relationship blossomed rapidly, a whirlwind romance that caught me by surprise. When Alex suggested I meet his parents, I anticipated a normal family introduction. However, the reality was far from what I had expected. The day of the meeting was wrapped in an air of nervous anticipation. As a natural redhead, I've always stood out, but I never imagined it would become a point of contention. We arrived at Alex's parents' home, a quaint suburban house with a well-tended garden. Alex, sensing my anxiety, gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. "Don't worry, Sharon. It'll be fine," he said, trying to comfort me. Yet, the moment we entered, I felt like I had stepped onto unwelcoming territory. Mrs. Johnson, Alex's mother, greeted us with a polite but forced smile. Her eyes, however, narrowed slightly as she took in my appearance. "Oh, a redhead," she said, her tone laced with a hint of disdain. "You know what they say about redheads. They're always the ones to watch out for." I felt my face flush with embarrassment, the comment catching me off guard. Alex, clearly upset by his mother's words, responded with a hint of irritation in his voice. "Mom, that's an old wives' tale. Sharon is nothing like that." Mr. Johnson, who seemed younger than his years, stood by, nodding in agreement with his wife's assessment, but not contributing his own words to the conversation. Attempting to defuse the tension, I tried to turn the comment into a joke. "Well, the only thing I'm guilty of cheating on is my diet," I said, forcing a laugh. However, my attempt at humor fell flat. Mrs. Johnson's expression remained unamused. She turned to Alex, her voice firm and serious. "Alex, she's not right for you. We cannot approve of this." Alex's face grew stern, and he took a step forward, his voice laced with determination. "Mom, Dad, I love Sharon. If you can't accept her, then we'll have to do without your blessing." The rest of the visit passed in a blur of strained politeness and unspoken judgments. As we left, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being unfairly judged and labeled, all because of my hair color. After the unsettling encounter with Alex's parents, we decided to have a small, intimate wedding. It was just us and a few close friends in a little chapel downtown. The absence of Alex's family hung in the air, but we were determined to make the best of our day. On the morning of our wedding, as I was getting ready, my best friend and maid of honor, Sarah, tried to lighten the mood. "Sharon, you look stunning. Alex won't know what hit him," she said with a wink, helping me with the final touches. I smiled, grateful for her support. "Thanks, Sarah. I just wish Alex's parents could see past, well, my hair." Sarah frowned. "Forget about them, Sharon. Today's about you and Alex. It's your love that matters, not their approval." The ceremony was simple yet beautiful. As I walked down the aisle, I saw Alex waiting for me, his eyes brimming with love and emotion. In that moment, all my worries faded away. Alex whispered as I reached him, "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, Sharon." During the vows, Alex held my hands tightly. "Sharon, I may not have my parents here today, but standing with you, I know I have everything I need. You're my family now," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. I replied, my own voice filled with emotion, "Alex, I promise to stand by you, through challenges and joys. Your heart is my home." After the ceremony, our little group celebrated at a local restaurant. The laughter and joy around us were a stark contrast to the rejection we'd faced. Yet, in that small, cozy setting, I felt a sense of peace and belonging. As we cut the cake, Alex said jokingly, "Well, I guess this makes us official partners in crime now, right? Partners against the world?" I laughed, feeling a surge of happiness and love. "Absolutely, partners against the world." That night, as we returned home, Alex held me close. "Sharon, I know today wasn't what we initially dreamed of. But having you by my side makes it perfect." I nestled into his embrace, feeling a sense of completeness. Our quiet wedding, though not grand, was a profound declaration of our love and commitment, a testament to our strength together, despite the odds. After the wedding, Alex and I hoped things would settle down, but the dinners at his parents' house only grew more tense. Each visit was like walking on eggshells, with his mother's thinly veiled comments and the forced politeness of his father. One evening, we were sitting around the dinner table with Mr. and Mrs. Johnson and a couple of their friends. The conversation inevitably turned to gossip, and Mrs. Johnson's friend, Mrs. Blake, started a story about a neighbor. And would you believe it? Caught red-handed, cheating with the gardener. And she was a redhead too, Mrs. Blake exclaimed, casting a sly glance my way. I felt my face heat up. Trying to remain composed, I said, well, hair color hardly determines someone's character. Mrs. Johnson chimed in, oh, but you know how it is with stereotypes. There's always some truth to them. Alex, noticing my discomfort, quickly tried to change the subject. Mom, how about we talk about the new garden you were planning? Sharon has some great ideas for landscaping. But the damage was done. The insinuations hung in the air, making the rest of the dinner extremely uncomfortable. As we were leaving, I couldn't help but express my feelings to Alex. I can't keep doing this. It feels like they're judging me all the time. Alex sighed, a look of frustration crossing his face. I know, Sharon, and I'm sorry. I just don't understand why they can't give you a chance. On the drive home, we were both quiet, lost in our thoughts. The constant strain of these dinners was taking a toll on me, and I wondered how long we could endure this. The dinners at Alex's parents' house had always been a source of anxiety for me, but they became increasingly difficult when his mother started asking me uncomfortable questions. One such evening, I had reluctantly agreed to accompany Alex, hoping things might be different. But as we sat down for dinner, Mrs. Johnson's intrusive questioning began. So, Sharon, tell me about your work. How many male teachers are there at your school? Mrs. Johnson asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. I was taken aback by the directness of her question. There are a few, but I haven't really counted. Why do you ask? Mrs. Johnson leaned forward, her voice laced with insinuation. Just curious. Any of them particularly handsome? I could feel my face flush with discomfort. I really don't think of my colleagues that way, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. Alex, noticing my discomfort, chimed in, Mom, why does that matter? Sharon's committed to me, and that's all there is to it. Mrs. Johnson waved her hand dismissively. I'm just making conversation, dear. No need to get defensive. The dinner continued in this vein, with Mrs. Johnson probing and me trying to deflect her questions. It was clear she was insinuating something about my fidelity, which was both insulting and baseless. On our drive home, I expressed my feelings to Alex. I can't believe your mom. Her questions tonight were completely out of line. I felt like I was being interrogated. Alex sighed, his hand tightening on the steering wheel. I know, Sharon, it's ridiculous. I don't understand why she's acting like this. That's it, Alex. I don't think I can go back there. It's too much for me, I said, the decision weighing heavily on me but feeling necessary for my own peace of mind. Alex was silent for a moment before responding, I get it, Sharon. And I'm sorry. It's not fair to you. I'll talk to them about it. From then on, I stopped attending the dinners. Alex would go alone, and each time he left, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I didn't have to face the awkwardness, and sadness at the rift growing within his family because of me. It had been several weeks since I decided to step away from the uncomfortable dinners at Alex's parents' house. This decision, though made to preserve my sanity, led to a series of unsettling revelations that Alex brought home from his solo visits. Each account seemed more incredulous than the last, leaving us in a state of constant bewilderment and frustration. One such evening, as we curled up on our sofa, the comforting warmth of our home contrasted sharply with the cold tension Alex had carried back. He seemed particularly distressed, his normally calm demeanor replaced by a look of utter disbelief. Sharon, I'm not sure how to even start explaining what happened tonight, Alex said, his voice heavy with unease. What happened? You look really upset, Alex, I replied, my heart starting to race with worry. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. You know I've been going to these dinners alone, right? Well, tonight, Mom took it to another level. She had invited several young women over. It wasn't just a friendly gathering, Sharon. It felt like she was setting up dates for me, as if I wasn't already married. I felt a mix of shock and disbelief wash over me. Setting up dates? But why would she do that? Does she not realize we're married and committed to each other? I tried to make sense of it all. Alex continued, his frustration growing. I asked her outright why she was doing this. Her response was simply that she wanted me to keep my options open. As if our marriage was just a temporary arrangement. Options open? I echoed, incredulous. That's absurd, Alex. We took vows. This isn't some casual fling that she can just dismiss. Alex nodded, his hands clenched in frustration. Exactly. I told her that I'm committed to you, that you're my wife and I love you. But she just seemed to brush it off, as if our marriage was some sort of juvenile phase. The conversation left us both reeling. The next morning, as I recounted the incident to my friend Sarah over a cup of coffee, her reaction mirrored my own. That's outrageous, Sharon. How can his mother blatantly disrespect your marriage like that? It's almost like she's trying to sabotage it, Sarah exclaimed, her eyes wide with shock. I don't know, but I can't keep dealing with this. It's like she's living in denial, I replied, feeling drained just thinking about it. Alex and I agreed that we needed to create some distance from his parents. This decision, though difficult, was necessary to protect our marriage from the constant undermining and disrespect. However, the following weeks, though void of direct confrontation, carried an undercurrent of unease and tension. As the days passed, I found myself constantly reflecting on Mrs. Johnson's actions. Her blatant attempts to set Alex up with other women, right under our noses, were a direct attack on our relationship. I wondered what we had done to deserve this treatment. Why was she so intent on destroying our happiness? Alex, too, was deeply troubled. I just don't understand her, Sharon. Why can't she see how happy we are together? Why can't she accept our marriage? The distance we created from Alex's parents brought a temporary peace, but that calm was shattered one ordinary school day. I was in the teacher's lounge when Mr. Davis, the school principal, approached me with a concerned expression. Sharon, can I have a word with you in my office? He asked in a tone that immediately set me on edge. Of course, Mr. Davis, I replied, my mind racing with possibilities. In his office, Mr. Davis closed the door and gestured for me to sit. Sharon, I had a rather unusual visitor today, he began, his brows furrowed in disapproval. My heart sank. Who was it? Your mother-in-law, Mrs. Johnson, he said. She was asking some very personal questions about you, your behavior at school, and your interactions with male colleagues. I was stunned into silence. The idea that Mrs. Johnson would go to such lengths was beyond belief. What did you tell her? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. I told her that your personal life is none of our business as long as it doesn't affect your professional conduct, which, by the way, has always been exemplary, Mr. Davis replied firmly. But Sharon, I must say, this is highly inappropriate and concerning. Gathering my thoughts, I replied, I'm so sorry, Mr. Davis. I had no idea she would do something like this. I assure you, there's nothing untoward in my conduct at school. I know that, Sharon. I just thought you should be aware, he said, offering a sympathetic look. As I left his office, a mixture of embarrassment and anger washed over me. The fact that Mrs. Johnson had the audacity to come to my workplace and question my integrity was outrageous. That evening, I recounted the incident to Alex, who listened in shocked silence. I can't believe she did that. Going to your school? Questioning your professionalism? This is going too far, Sharon, he said, his voice laced with anger. I don't know what she's trying to achieve, I said, feeling a mix of frustration and helplessness. But this is a violation of my privacy and my professional life. Alex reached for my hand, his grip firm. We need to confront her, Sharon. This can't go on. She's crossing every line imaginable. The next day, I called Mrs. Johnson, my hands trembling with a mix of nervousness and anger. The phone rang, and when she answered, I took a deep breath. "Mrs. Johnson, I need to talk to you about your visit to my school," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, Sharon, I was just looking out for my son's best interests," she replied, her tone dismissive. "Looking out for Alex by questioning my character at my workplace? That's completely unacceptable, Mrs. Johnson," I retorted, my frustration boiling over. "Well, I just needed to make sure that everything was appropriate," she said, her voice cold. "Your actions were inappropriate, and I won't tolerate this kind of invasion into my personal and professional life," I said firmly, drawing a line. Months had passed since the school incident with Mrs. Johnson, and Alex and I had begun to find some semblance of normalcy in our lives again. That fragile peace was shattered one evening when Mrs. Johnson unexpectedly appeared at our doorstep, her face twisted into a triumphant smirk. "I knew it. I have proof, Sharon," she exclaimed as soon as I opened the door, not even waiting for an invitation to enter. Alex, hearing the commotion, came to the living room. "Mom, what are you talking about? What proof?" Mrs. Johnson, brandishing a laptop like a weapon, declared, "I hired a private detective. I have photos and videos of Sharon. She's been unfaithful, Alex." I felt my heart drop, confusion and disbelief swirling within me. "That's ridiculous. I've never been unfaithful," I protested, my voice firm despite the shock. Ignoring my protest, Mrs. Johnson opened her laptop, revealing a series of photos of me sitting in a cafe with a man sporting bright red hair. "Look at these, Alex. See for yourself." Alex and I leaned in to look at the photos. After a moment, we couldn't help but burst into laughter, much to Mrs. Johnson's confusion. "That's my brother, Mrs. Johnson," I explained between laughs. "He's visiting from out of town." Mrs. Johnson's triumphant expression faltered. "Your brother?" "Yes, my brother," I repeated, still chuckling. "We both have the same bright red hair, remember?" Alex, now frowning, asked to see the videos. As we watched a clip of me and my brother chatting in the cafe, Alex's attention was drawn to something in the background. "Wait, rewind that part," he said, pointing at the screen. We all watched as, in the background of the video, an older man and a younger woman were sitting at a nearby table, engaged in a rather intimate moment. The realization hit us all at once. "That's Dad?" Alex muttered in disbelief. Mrs. Johnson's face went pale as she recognized her husband in the video, kissing a woman who was definitely not her. The room fell into a stunned silence. The evidence Mrs. Johnson had brought to condemn me had inadvertently exposed her own husband's infidelity. "Mom, is that Dad?" Alex asked again, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Johnson just sat there, speechless, the laptop now forgotten on her lap. That evening, which began with accusations and supposed revelations, ended with a shocking twist that none of us could have predicted. Mrs. Johnson, in her quest to prove my unfaithfulness, had inadvertently uncovered a bitter truth about her own marriage. The night Mrs. Johnson left our house was one we wouldn't forget anytime soon. The living room, where just moments ago she had revealed the photos and videos, felt unnaturally quiet. Alex and I sat there, trying to digest the whirlwind of events. Can you believe it? My dad and Mom's plan backfiring like this? Alex finally broke the silence, a mix of disbelief and sadness in his voice. "It's surreal," I replied, still feeling a bit numb. She was so intent on proving me wrong, she didn't see the bigger picture. Alex sighed heavily, looking out the window. "I feel like I don't even know my parents anymore. This whole thing, it's just a mess." I nodded in agreement, feeling a pang of empathy for him. "I'm sorry, Alex. This must be really hard for you." He turned to face me, his expression softening. "You know, in a weird way, I'm grateful for your strength through all this. You could have easily walked away from the drama." I reached out, taking his hand in mine. "I wouldn't do that. We're in this together, remember?" Over the next few days, Alex's phone was bombarded with calls and messages from his mother. She was frantic, seeking someone to confide in, but Alex wasn't ready to talk. He needed time to process the betrayal and the unraveling of his family. One evening, as we were prepping dinner, Alex brought up the subject again. "I spoke to Dad today," he said, chopping vegetables a bit more forcefully than necessary. "And, how did that go?" I asked, curious yet apprehensive. "He admitted everything. Said it had been going on for a while. He's moving out, and they're talking about divorce." Alex's voice was flat, almost detached. "That's tough, Alex. I'm sorry you have to go through all this." I reached out to squeeze his arm. He shrugged, a sad smile on his face. "It's weird. I'm angry, but also relieved that the truth is out. No more secrets and lies." As the days turned into weeks, the reality of his parents' impending divorce began to sink in. We had many long conversations about trust, honesty, and the complexities of relationships. One night, curled up on the couch, Alex shared his thoughts. "You know, Sharon, all this with my parents, it's made me realize how important honesty is. And how much I value what we have." I leaned against him, feeling a sense of solidarity. "I agree. It's been a roller coaster, but it's also shown us how strong we can be together." "Exactly. We've weathered this storm as a team. It's not been easy, but I feel like we can handle anything now," Alex said, a note of determination in his voice. In the weeks that followed, we saw less of Mrs. Johnson. The revelation of her husband's affair and the subsequent fallout had taken its toll on her. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for her. But still I couldn't forgive her. Not now. Maybe someday I'll be able to forget about what she did to me. Today, I am completely passionate about my husband, and we are expecting a baby soon. And who knows, he'll probably be as red-haired as me.
I'm Irene, navigating life at 30 with a mix of web design and motherhood. Our family nucleus was simple: me, my husband Mike, and our 2-year-old sunshine, Danny. Our world was comfortably wrapped within the walls of our home, which stood as a testament to the life we built together. Mike worked for my dad's company, a job he was proud of, and I carved pixels into designs from my home studio. Our routine was pleasantly mundane until one evening at my parents' house, where family dinners were more than just meals. They were gatherings punctuated by discussions, laughter, and, sometimes, life-changing announcements. "So, I've been thinking," my dad began, his voice commanding the room's attention. He was a self-made man, a pillar of wisdom in business suits. "We're expanding the company. There's a new branch opening in the neighboring city, and I want Mike to take the lead on this." Mike, who had always admired my dad, perked up immediately. His eyes gleamed with a mix of excitement and determination. "Mr. Thompson, that's a fantastic opportunity. I'm all in." I felt a surge of pride and excitement. "That's wonderful news. We should all move there for the project duration. It's just a few months, and it'll be like a little adventure," I said, already envisioning our temporary life in a new city. Unexpectedly, Mike hesitated, casting a glance that didn't quite reach his usual confidence. "Actually, Irene, it might be better if you and Danny stay here. Moving could be a hassle for the little guy." His words hit me unexpectedly, like a cold splash of reality in our warm, cozy life. "But Mike, I thought we were in this together. And it's not like we have to uproot our lives. I can work from anywhere, and it would be a nice change for Danny." My dad nodded in agreement, his voice echoing my thoughts. "Mike, Irene has a point. The family should stick together in such times. And Irene's job gives her that flexibility." Mike seemed to be caught off guard, a nervous chuckle escaping him. "I was just joking. Of course, you both should come along." But that joke didn't sit right with me. It lingered in the air, an uninvited guest at our family dinner. The evening progressed with Dad and Mike diving into the logistics of the new business venture, but my mind was stuck on Mike's initial reaction. Why the hesitation? Why the reluctance? Later that night, after tucking Danny into bed, I found myself sitting across from Mike in our living room. The house was quiet, a stark contrast to the turmoil in my mind. "Mike, about dinner tonight," I started, my voice a blend of confusion and concern. "You really caught me off guard, suggesting that Danny and I shouldn't join you. Is there something on your mind?" He looked up from his phone, meeting my gaze for the first time since we sat down. "Irene, I didn't mean to upset you. It's just that setting up a new branch will be demanding. I thought it'd be easier for you to stay put, avoid the stress of moving." I leaned forward, searching his face for the familiar comfort. "But we've always faced challenges together. That's what we do. Why would this time be any different?" Mike sighed, putting his phone down. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "You're right, we do. And we will. I guess I was just overthinking it. It was a silly thought, nothing more." His words were meant to reassure, but they hung heavy in the room, a reminder that something in our equation had shifted, however slightly. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs just when you think you've got it all figured out. Our little family was on the brink of a new adventure, or so I thought, until Danny, our 2-year-old bundle of joy, decided to rewrite our plans. It started with a mild fever, nothing too alarming at first, but it quickly escalated. I remember holding Danny in my arms, feeling his little body burning up as I dialed our family doctor. "Dr. Jacobs, Danny's fever isn't coming down." "I'm really worried," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. After a thorough checkup, Dr. Jacobs' expression was serious. "Irene, I'm afraid it's more than just a common cold. Danny needs rest and cannot travel for a while. Moving to a new city is out of the question right now." The news hit me like a ton of bricks. I called Mike that evening, the weight of uncertainty heavy in my voice. "Mike, Danny's sick. The doctor advised against traveling. We can't join you for now." On the other end, there was a pause before Mike responded. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Oh, is it serious? Well, that's okay, Irene. He needs to get better. We can manage." Something about his response didn't sit right with me. There was an undertone of relief, perhaps even contentment, that Danny and I wouldn't be joining him. It gnawed at me, that unsettling feeling of doubt. The weeks that followed were tough. Danny's illness turned out to be a stubborn infection that took its time healing. My days and nights merged into a blur of caregiving, leaving little room for anything else. Mike's calls became infrequent, and when he did call, his words felt rehearsed, lacking the warmth I was used to. "Everything's okay here, Irene. Just busy with work. How's Danny?" I'd update him, hoping for more engagement, but the conversations were brief and perfunctory. "He's getting better, slowly. We miss you, Mike." "Yeah, I miss you guys too," he'd reply, but it sounded hollow, as if he was saying it out of obligation rather than feeling. The distance was growing, not just in miles, but in our connection. It felt like Mike was slipping away, retreating into a world I wasn't part of. One evening, after a particularly short and unsatisfying call with Mike, I sat in the living room long after Danny had fallen asleep. The silence of the house echoed my thoughts. Was this what our life was going to be now? Mike distant and preoccupied, and me, alone, holding down the fort? Days turned into weeks, and the distance between Mike and me felt more than just miles apart. It was as if he was slowly drifting away, becoming a stranger. His calls, once filled with laughter and warmth, were now just formal check-ins. One evening, as I was putting Danny to bed, my phone buzzed. It was Mike. "Hey, how's Danny doing?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual tenderness. "He's better, still recovering," I replied, hoping to stir some emotion in him. "Work's crazy here," he said, sounding distracted. I sat down in the living room, the silence engulfing me. Mike, we barely talk these days. Is everything okay with you? You seem different. There was a pause on the line. Different? No, I'm just really busy, Irene. You know how it is starting up a new branch. I tried to keep the conversation going, to bridge the growing gap. I understand you're busy, but it feels like you're not just physically away. It's like I don't know you anymore. He let out a sigh. Irene, you're overthinking it. It's just stress, that's all. Once things settle down here, it'll be better. But his reassurances did little to ease my growing concerns. His words felt empty, devoid of the connection we once shared. Weeks passed, and Mike's brief return home did little to quell my fears. He was physically present, but emotionally distant. He spent most of his time either working on his laptop or engrossed in his phone. One night, I decided to confront him. Mike, we need to talk. You've been distant ever since you took this new job. Is there something you're not telling me? He looked up from his phone, his expression a mix of annoyance and surprise. Irene, why do you keep saying that? I'm right here. But you're not really. You're always on your phone or laptop. It's like you're here, but your mind is somewhere else, I said, my voice tinged with frustration. Mike closed his laptop with a sigh. Look, Irene, I've got a lot on my plate right now. The new branch, the pressures from your dad, it's a lot to handle. I'm just trying to do my best. I nodded, trying to understand. I get that, Mike, but we're a team, remember? If there's something bothering you, you can talk to me. He shook his head, a half smile on his face. There's nothing to talk about, Irene. I'm just busy, that's all. You're making a big deal out of nothing. But it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like a chasm was forming between us, one that I couldn't bridge, no matter how hard I tried. The day started routinely enough, with the familiar hum of my computer and the soft breathing of Danny during his nap. I was deep in thought, maneuvering through the complexities of a web design project, when a knock at the door jolted me back to reality. Opening it, I found myself face to face with a stranger, his eyes weary yet determined. Can I help you? I asked, curiosity mingling with a hint of apprehension. Yes, you're Irene, Mike's wife, right? I'm David. His voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of nervousness. I nodded, still unsure where this was going. That's me. What is this about? David took a deep breath, as if bracing himself. I believe your husband, Mike, is having an affair with my wife. His words hit me like a ton of bricks. That's impossible, I stammered, disbelief clouding my thoughts. Mike wouldn't do that. There's got to be some mistake. I thought the same at first, David admitted, reaching into his pocket. But then I found this. He handed me his phone, his hand shaking slightly. The photos displayed on the screen were heart-wrenching. There was Mike, undeniably him, in a series of intimate moments with a woman I didn't recognize. They were laughing, embracing, their closeness leaving no room for doubt. I felt my world spin as I handed back the phone. Why are you showing me this? My voice cracked, barely a whisper under the weight of my crumbling reality. David's gaze was sympathetic yet firm. Because you deserve to know the truth. And I think we should do something about it. A mixture of emotions surged through me, anger, betrayal, and an overwhelming sense of loss. What do you mean, do something about it? He leaned against the door frame, his posture suggesting a man who had nothing left to lose. I have a plan. A way to confront them, to bring this out into the open. I can't just let this go, and I don't think you should either. My mind raced. Part of me wanted to shut the door and pretend this never happened, but another, stronger part knew I couldn't live with the uncertainty. What kind of plan? We need more evidence, something undeniable. I propose we catch them together, in the act, David explained, his voice laced with a mix of pain and resolve. The idea was daunting, yet it resonated with the part of me that craved closure. How would we do that? I know where and when they meet. If you're willing, we can confront them, together, he proposed, his eyes searching mine for a decision. The thought of facing Mike in such a scenario was terrifying, yet the need for the truth, for some semblance of control in the chaos, was overpowering. Okay, I'm in. I need to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As David left, I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the weight of the decision I had just made. The path ahead was fraught with pain and uncertainty, but I knew there was no turning back. The truth was out there, and I had to face it, for my sake and for Danny's. The reality of what David and I were about to do hit me as we sat in the dimly lit apartment next door to Mike's. We were there to unveil the truth, using the thin walls to our advantage. The apartment, ironically provided by my father's company for Mike, was now the stage for uncovering his betrayal. David was setting up a small recording device, his hands steady but his eyes betraying a storm of emotions. Can't believe it's come to this, he muttered, more to himself than to me. I nodded, feeling a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Neither can I. But we need to know, right? As we waited, the silence between us was heavy, filled with unspoken fears and questions. Then, the sound of a door opening next door broke the stillness. My heart skipped a beat, and I saw David tense up. That's them, he said, his voice barely a whisper. We moved closer to the wall, straining to hear. The voices were muffled at first, but then clearer. It was Mike, his laughter unmistakable, mingling with a woman's voice, his mistress. I clenched my fists, fighting back a surge of emotions. The intimacy in their voices was like a knife twisting in my heart. Are you getting this? David asked, his voice tight with anger. I nodded, holding the recorder close to the wall. Yes, it's all being recorded. The sounds from the other side of the wall continued, laughter, conversation, and then unmistakably more intimate noises. It was excruciating to sit there, hearing Mike betray our family so blatantly. But amid the heartache, there was a growing sense of resolve. We were gathering the evidence we needed, undeniable proof of their betrayal. After what felt like an eternity, the noises ceased, and a heavy silence fell over our makeshift surveillance spot. David and I exchanged a look, a mix of sorrow and determination in our eyes. We have what we need, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Now we confront them. David nodded, his jaw set. Let's do it now. No point waiting. As we stood up, I felt a strange sense of empowerment mixed with dread. The life I had known with Mike was over, and confronting him was the first step into a new, uncertain future. We need to catch them off guard, David said as we moved toward the door. I agreed, clutching the recorder like a lifeline. Let's go. It's time they faced the consequences. Stepping out of the apartment, the weight of the moment settled on my shoulders. We were about to face the people who had turned our lives upside down. The confrontation would be painful, but necessary. David and I stood in the dimly lit corridor outside Mike's apartment, our hearts racing with a mix of anxiety and determination. The plan was simple, but bold. David would pretend to be a courier, a ruse to ensure Mike would open the door. David knocked firmly, announcing loudly enough to be heard through the door, "Delivery." We heard footsteps approaching from inside. The door swung open, and there stood Mike, his face transitioning from annoyance to shock as his eyes landed on me. "Irene? What the hell are you doing here?" I took a deep breath, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside. "We need to talk, Mike. Can I come in?" Behind Mike, the mistress, a young woman with a startled expression, stood frozen. Reluctantly, Mike stepped aside, allowing us entry. The room felt tense, charged with unspoken accusations and fear. Without mincing words, David confronted Mike. "We know about the affair, Mike. You can drop the act." Mike's reaction was a mix of defensiveness and scorn. This is nothing. She seduced me. I was just caught up." His mistress, now visibly shaken, retorted, "What? No, you were as much in this as I was." Ignoring her, Mike turned to me, trying to downplay the situation. "Irene, listen, this isn't what it looks like." I couldn't hold back any longer. "Not what it looks like?" "I heard everything, Mike. We have recordings." Mike glanced at the recording device in David's hand, his face turning pale. "Recordings? Irene, you've got to understand." "There's nothing to understand," I cut him off, my voice rising in anger. "You betrayed our family, Mike. You betrayed me and Danny." He started to say something but stopped, realizing the gravity of his situation. "Irene, please," Mike's voice trailed off as he fell to his knees, a pathetic figure of desperation. "Forgive me, I made a mistake. Please, don't tell your father about this." I looked down at him, feeling a mix of pity and revulsion. "You think I can just forgive and forget? I'm going to demand compensation for this betrayal. And yes, I will tell my father. He deserves to know the kind of man you really are." Mike's face crumpled in despair, but there was no going back. The trust we had was shattered beyond repair. David, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "You're going to pay for this, Mike. Both of you." The mistress, now crying, looked completely overwhelmed. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." As we left the apartment, leaving Mike and his mistress to their own messy reality, I felt a strange sense of closure. It was painful and heart-wrenching, but necessary. The confrontation was over, and with it, a chapter of my life had ended. Stepping out into the brisk evening air, the weight of what had just transpired in Mike's apartment hung heavily over me. David and I walked in silence to a nearby park bench. The noise of the city around us felt distant, muffled by the shock and turmoil churning inside. David was the first to break the silence. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Irene. But at least now you know the truth." I nodded, feeling numb. "Yes, the truth." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "What are you going to do now?" He looked down, his hands clenched tightly. "I need to think. There's a lot to process. But one thing is clear, I can't stay with her after this." "I understand," I said softly. The reality of my own situation was beginning to sink in. I need to start planning for a life without Mike. For Danny's sake. David looked at me, empathy in his eyes. "If you need anything, any help, just let me know." I managed a weak smile. "Thank you, David. I appreciate it." We sat there for a while longer, lost in our own thoughts, before parting ways. As I walked back to my parents' house, where Danny was staying, the magnitude of the situation hit me. My marriage was over, and the life I had known was shattered. When I arrived, my parents immediately sensed something was wrong. "Irene, what happened? You look upset," my mom asked, concern etched on her face. I sighed, not sure where to begin. "Mom, Dad, I found out Mike has been having an affair." The room went silent. My dad's expression hardened. "Are you sure?" I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "Yes, I'm sure. I heard them, and I have recordings." My mom reached out, taking my hand. "Oh, Irene, I'm so sorry. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to file for divorce," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "I can't be with him after this. It's over." My dad, always the protector, spoke up. "He won't get away with this. I'll make sure of that. And you and Danny will always have a home here." I felt tears welling up in my eyes, grateful for their support. "Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you both." The final chapter of my marriage to Mike was written in a lawyer's office, amidst a sea of paperwork and legal jargon. The divorce process was grueling but necessary. I fought hard, with my lawyer by my side, to ensure that Danny and I would have the financial security we needed. The court granted me alimony and compensation for Mike's betrayal, a small solace in the wake of our shattered life. Meanwhile, David, the man who had been thrust into my life by our shared misfortune, also finalized his divorce. His wife, once living a life of luxury, now faced a starkly different reality. She had to trade her affluent lifestyle for a job as a saleswoman in a retail store, a harsh consequence of her actions. As for Mike, the repercussions of his infidelity were far-reaching. My father, once a mentor and supporter, was ruthless in his response. He not only fired Mike from the company, but also made it clear that he would use his influence to prevent Mike from securing a position in any reputable firm. The man who once had a promising career now juggled two menial jobs, struggling to make ends meet. Life after the divorce was a journey of healing and rediscovery for me. I focused on raising Danny, ensuring that the upheaval in our lives didn't dim his bright, innocent spirit. Watching him grow, laugh, and explore the world was a balm to my bruised heart. My work as a web designer provided not just a financial lifeline, but also a welcome distraction. I threw myself into my projects, finding joy and fulfillment in creating and designing. It was a reminder that despite the chaos, I still had control over some aspects of my life. My parents were my rock during this time. They provided unwavering support, offering a safe haven for Danny and me. "You're stronger than you realize, Irene," my dad would often say. And as time passed, I began to believe him. In the quiet moments, often after I had put Danny to bed, I would reflect on the tumultuous journey. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but it was slowly being replaced by a newfound strength and independence. I had navigated through the darkest of times and emerged on the other side, not unscathed, but certainly stronger. As I closed the chapter on a painful part of my life, I opened a new one, filled with possibilities and the promise of a fresh start. My journey was not over, it was merely taking a new path, one that I was ready to travel with hope and determination. In our cozy little home, life often felt like a well-orchestrated symphony, each day flowing into the next with a comforting regularity. I'm Eliza, a dedicated dentist whose life revolves around caring for others, both in my clinic and at home. My husband, Tom, a man whose past life had etched lines of worry and contemplation on his face, was often my partner in quiet evenings spent discussing everything and nothing. This particular evening, however, held a different tune. As I entered our home, the aroma of simmering stew greeted me, a sign of Tom's attempt to provide some culinary comfort. I found him in the kitchen, looking more troubled than usual. "Hey love, what's cooking?" I asked, trying to inject some lightness into the heavy air. Tom glanced up, managing a weak smile. "Just some stew." "Eliza, we need to talk about something important." "It's about Alex." Alex, Tom's son from his previous marriage, lived with his mother in a different city. Our interactions were limited to brief, somewhat formal exchanges on Skype, his shy demeanor never allowing me to know him beyond the basic pleasantries. "What about Alex? Is he okay?" I queried, concern lacing my voice as I took a seat at the kitchen table. Tom joined me, his hands clasped together, the weight of his words gathering like storm clouds. "He's fine, health-wise. But he's been given a chance to follow his dream of forming a band. He's really passionate about it, Eliza. But, well, he needs our financial help." I leaned in, listening intently. "How much does he need?" I asked, my mind already sifting through our finances. Tom hesitated, then uttered, "Around $10,000. It's for the equipment, some studio time, things like that." I took a deep breath, the number settling in my mind. "That's a significant amount, Tom. But if it's for his dream, Tell me, have you seen any of his work? Is he serious about this path? He nodded vigorously. I've heard some of his music during our calls. He spends every spare moment he has on it. I believe in him, Eliza. I watched the earnest look in his eyes, a father's love mingling with hope. All right, Tom. If you believe this is right, I trust your judgment. Let's support Alex. But, let's also ensure it's a wise decision. We should probably have a chat with him, understand his plan a little better. Tom's face lit up with a mixture of relief and gratitude. Thank you, Eliza. This means the world to him, and to me. And yes, let's arrange a call with him soon. As we sat there planning our next steps, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I was about to invest in a dream, in a young man I barely knew, hoping that our contribution would set him on a path to success and fulfillment. It was a risk, but perhaps, in the grand scheme of things, a risk worth taking for family. Months slipped by after the first financial aid for Tom's son, Alex. Life resumed its usual pace with my dental practice bustling and Tom's work steady. Then one evening, as autumn leaves began to paint the ground in hues of amber and gold, Tom approached me with a familiar hesitancy in his eyes. Eliza, can we talk about something? He asked, his voice carrying an edge of discomfort. I nodded, setting aside the book I was reading. Of course, what's on your mind? He took a deep breath, his gaze avoiding mine. It's about Alex again. He's making great progress with his music, really diving into it. But he needs more support, another $10,000. I felt a twinge of surprise, my eyebrows knitting together in concern. Another $10,000? But we just provided for his initial setup. What does he need this time? Tom's fingers fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. He's looking to upgrade some equipment, maybe get into a better studio. It's just that, things are getting more serious for him now. I sighed, a sense of unease settling in. Tom, I understand wanting to support Alex, but we need to be mindful. We're talking about a lot of money here. I earn well, but these are hard-earned savings. We need to think about our future too. Tom's face turned a shade darker, his voice raising slightly. But it's for Alex, Eliza. My son. Don't you think he deserves this chance? His tone stung, a hint of accusation lingering in the air. Of course, I do, I replied, my voice firm yet calm. But I also believe in responsible support. We can't just keep handing out money without understanding the full picture. The conversation grew heated, our words a volley of concern and frustration. Then, suddenly, Tom's demeanor shifted from defensive to outright angry. You just don't understand, Eliza. You're not a parent. You don't know what it's like to want to give everything to your child. His words cut deep, echoing around the room. I recoiled, hurt flashing in my eyes. Tom, that's unfair. I've been nothing but supportive. But we can't be reckless. And your son is almost an adult, he needs to learn financial responsibility too. Tom shook his head, his anger boiling over. You're just being selfish and greedy, Eliza. You don't understand what family means. With that, he stormed out of the house, leaving me in a stunned silence. His accusations felt like a slap, the word greedy reverberating in my mind. I sat there, trying to piece together the fragments of our conversation, the harmony of our life now disturbed by a growing discord. Days turned into a week, and Tom's absence stretched on. I was left to ponder the situation alone, my concern for Alex's future wrestling with my dismay at Tom's reaction. When Tom finally returned, his demeanor had softened, but the underlying issue remained unresolved. I'm sorry, Eliza, he said, his voice low. I shouldn't have exploded like that. It's just, I want to do right by Alex. I nodded, accepting his apology but feeling the distance between us. I understand, Tom. But we need to be a team in this, especially when it comes to big decisions. Reluctantly, I agreed to the additional support for Alex, my heart heavy with apprehension. Tom's immediate switch back to his affectionate self was a relief, but also a reminder of the fragile balance we were treading. The cycle of financial requests for Tom's son had become a recurring theme, straining not just our bank account, but also the very fabric of our relationship. Just as the leaves began to shift to the fiery colors of fall, Tom approached me again, his demeanor more desperate than before. "Eliza, we need to talk about Alex again," he began, avoiding my gaze. I set down my book, a sense of dread filling the air. "What is it this time, Tom?" He fidgeted, clearly uncomfortable. "It's a big opportunity for him, a chance to go on a tour with his band. He needs our help, Eliza. He needs $30,000. I was taken aback, the figure echoing in my mind like a bad joke. $30,000? Tom, this is getting out of hand. We've been supportive, but this is too much." Tom's face flushed with frustration. "But it's for his future, Eliza. Can't you see? He could make it big." I stood up, feeling the tension like a physical force between us. "And I want to support him, but not blindly. We've never even seen him play. We don't know if this band is real or just a whim. We need some kind of proof, Tom." His voice raised, a note of panic creeping in. "Why can't you just trust me, Eliza? Why do you need proof for everything?" I replied, my own voice rising in response. "Because trust is based on honesty and responsibility, Tom. And right now, I'm not seeing a lot of either." The room was thick with unsaid words and mounting frustrations. Tom then dropped a bombshell that shattered any semblance of normalcy. "If you don't give this money for Alex, I don't think I can stay in this marriage." I felt as if the floor had fallen out beneath me. "Are you blackmailing me, Tom? Using our marriage as a bargaining chip for money?" He didn't answer, his silence speaking volumes. I realized then that our issues ran deeper than I had ever imagined. This was about more than money, it was about respect, trust, and the balance of power in our relationship. "I need time to think," I said finally, my voice hollow. "This isn't something I can decide right now." Tom stormed out, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts. I knew something had to change. We couldn't continue down this path of ultimatums and financial demands. That night, as I lay in bed, the space beside me cold and empty, I realized that I was at a crossroads. One path led to giving in to Tom's demands, sacrificing my principles and possibly my financial security. The other was fraught with the unknown, potentially leading to the end of my marriage. In the quiet of our home, I sat down with my laptop, a sense of unease stirring within me as I navigated to Alex's Instagram page. The images that greeted me were far from what I expected of a struggling musician. Lavish parties, designer clothes, exotic locations, it all painted a picture of luxury that belied the story we'd been told. I needed answers directly from Alex. I called him on Skype, ensuring the video recording was on, ready to confront him about the inconsistencies. He answered, his face a mask of casual indifference. "Alex, we need to talk about the money your dad and I have been sending you," I began, my tone firm. He shrugged nonchalantly. "What about it?" I didn't mince words. "I've seen your Instagram. Your lifestyle doesn't match up with needing money for a band. I'm not sending any more money." His face changed then, the cool facade slipping into something darker. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have connections, people that can make life very unpleasant for you." I felt a chill at his threat, but I didn't waver. "Alex, I've been recording this conversation. Threatening me is a serious offense. I can take this to the police." The bravado drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, frightened boy. Tears welled up in his eyes as he realized the gravity of his actions. "Please, no. I was just talking big. I'm not in any gang. I don't want any trouble with the police." His sudden shift from intimidation to desperation made me pause. He was on the verge of revealing something more, something that might explain the bizarre turn of events. Sitting back, I watched Alex's face, tear-streaked and pale, as he prepared to spill the secrets he'd been holding onto. "All right, Alex, let's hear it then. What's going on?" Through sobs, Alex began to unravel the web of lies. It started off small, just me wanting some extra cash. But then I found something about Dad. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "What did you find about your dad, Alex?" He wiped his eyes, taking a shaky breath. "I found out he was seeing someone, not just anyone, someone from his past. I took pictures, threatened to tell you unless he kept sending money." My world spun with his confession. "Tom has been unfaithful? And you've been blackmailing him?" Alex nodded miserably. "Yes. I never meant for it to get this far. I wanted to live a certain way, and when I found out about Dad, it seemed like an easy way to keep the money coming." I felt a mix of anger and pity. "Alex, do you realize how serious this is? Blackmail is a crime. And your father, how could he?" He sniffled, looking down. I know it's messed up. I don't know, I got in too deep. But I swear, Eliza, I don't want to cause any more trouble. I'll stop. I'll figure something else out." I sighed, the weight of the situation heavy on my shoulders. "And the band, the tours, all of that was just a lie?" He nodded again. "Yeah. I'm sorry. I like music, sure, but there was no band. I just needed a story for the money." I sat back, processing everything. My husband had been unfaithful, my stepson a blackmailer. The foundation of my family was cracked and broken. "Alex, I need to talk to your father about this. And you need to sort yourself out. This isn't the way to go through life." He nodded, a small glimmer of understanding in his eyes. "I know. I'm sorry, Eliza. Really." As the call ended, I was left in a silent house, the echo of Alex's confessions ringing in my ears. The lies were unraveling, revealing a painful truth I could no longer ignore. I knew the next step was confronting Tom, but a part of me dreaded what that confrontation would bring. The man I had built a life with was a stranger, and our marriage a facade. I needed to gather my strength, for the conversation ahead would be the most challenging of my life. The house felt unbearably quiet as I waited for Tom to return. The ticking of the clock seemed to echo my racing heart, each minute stretching longer than the last. When I finally heard the turn of the key in the lock, my stomach knotted with anxiety. Tom entered, immediately sensing the storm brewing in the air. "Eliza, what's wrong? You look like you're about to explode." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Tom, we need to talk. Now." He hesitated, then nodded, taking a seat across from me. "What's it about?" I didn't beat around the bush. "It's about Alex, Tom. And it's about you. I know everything, the blackmail, the affair." Alex confessed. Tom's face paled, his eyes widening in shock. What? "Eliza, I can explain." I felt a surge of anger. "Explain? How can you possibly explain lying to me, allowing your son to blackmail you, and using our money to cover up your affair?" He looked down, shame etched across his face. "I was afraid, Eliza. Afraid of losing you. I thought I could control the situation, but it spiraled out of control." I shook my head, my voice rising. "Control? You call this control? You've been living a double life, Tom. And all the while, lying to my face." Tom's voice broke. "I'm sorry, Eliza. I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't know how to handle it." I stood up, my hands trembling with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Tom. Your son was threatening me, using gang connections to intimidate me because of your mistakes. Tom stood as well, reaching out to me. Please, Eliza, let's try to work this out. I'll do anything. I pushed his hand away. Work this out? How can I possibly trust you again? How can we go back to how things were knowing what I know now? He had no answer, just stood there, a man broken by his own deceit. I knew then that our marriage was beyond repair. The trust that once bound us together had been shattered by lies and blackmail. Tom, I need you to leave, I said, my voice cold and final. He didn't argue, just nodded silently and walked out, the door closing with a soft click that seemed to echo the closing chapter of our life together. As I sat back down, alone in the echoing silence of our home, I felt a profound sense of loss and betrayal. But amidst the pain, there was also a flicker of relief. The truth was out, painful as it was, and now I could begin to heal, to rebuild my life on a foundation of honesty and self-respect. In the aftermath of our confrontation, the house felt empty, the silence a constant reminder of the betrayal and deceit that had unfolded. I knew I couldn't just let things end there. There needed to be consequences for the lies and the financial manipulation. It was time for a legal reckoning. I found myself sitting across from a lawyer, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. Mrs. Johnson, I've gone through all the information you provided, he began, his tone professional yet sympathetic. I need to pursue legal action, I stated firmly. Not just for the divorce, but for the recovery of the money Tom used for his blackmail payments, and for the emotional distress this has caused me. The lawyer nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. We can certainly file for divorce on grounds of infidelity and emotional distress. As for the money, we'll need all the evidence you have of the transactions and any communication between you and your husband or stepson regarding this matter. I assured him I had kept meticulous records. I trusted Tom completely. Never thought I'd need these as evidence against him, I admitted, a sad irony in my voice. He offered a small, reassuring smile. You're doing the right thing by protecting yourself and your assets. This won't be easy, but I'll be with you every step of the way. The following weeks were a blur of legal documents, meetings, and court appearances. Tom looked defeated each time our paths crossed, the reality of his actions finally hitting home. At one such encounter, he approached me, his expression one of regret. Eliza, I never wanted it to come to this. I'm sorry. I looked at him, the man I once loved, now a stranger. Sorry isn't enough, Tom. You made your choices, and now we're both living with the consequences. The final court session was the hardest. I sat there, listening as my lawyer laid out the case, detailing the emotional and financial toll of Tom's deceit. When the judge finally spoke, granting me the divorce along with compensation for the misused funds and emotional suffering, I felt a bittersweet relief. As I walked out of the courtroom, the weight of the past months felt both heavier and lighter. I had stood up for myself, faced the legal battle, and emerged with a sense of closure, albeit a painful one. But the journey wasn't over. There were still pieces of my life to pick up, a future to rebuild. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but as I stepped out into the sunlight, I felt a glimmer of hope. I decided to visit my old friend and confidant, Martha, who had been a pillar of support through my ordeal. As I entered her cozy living room, she greeted me with a warm, knowing smile. Eliza, look at you. How are you holding up? She asked, ushering me to sit. I sighed, a small smile playing on my lips. I'm okay, Martha. It's been tough, but I feel like I'm finally seeing the light at the end of this long, dark tunnel. Martha patted my hand gently. You've been through so much, my dear. But you handled it with such grace and strength. I'm proud of you. I nodded, feeling a sense of pride myself. It was hard, Martha, facing Tom in court, unraveling all the lies. But I stood up for myself. And now, it's time for a new beginning. Martha's eyes twinkled with encouragement. So, what's next for Eliza Johnson? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question. First, I think I need some time to heal, to rediscover who I am outside of this whole mess. Then, I want to focus on my work, maybe even take a vacation, something I haven't done in years. Sounds like a plan, Martha replied warmly. And remember, Eliza, this is your chance to rewrite your story, on your own terms. Her words resonated within me. Yes, I had been through a storm, but now I had the opportunity to chart my own course. In the following weeks, I immersed myself in work and self-care. I took up yoga, started reading more, and even planned a solo trip to a place I'd always wanted to visit. Life without Tom was different, but it was mine to shape. One evening, as I was preparing for my trip, the doorbell rang. It was Alex. He stood there, looking nervous and remorseful. Eliza, I just wanted to say I'm sorry, face to face. For everything, he stammered. I regarded him, seeing not the aggressive young man from our Skype call, but a remorseful, lost boy. Thank you, Alex. I hope you've learned from this, and that you're making changes for the better. He nodded earnestly. I am. And I owe it to you for standing up to me. You helped me see how wrong I was. I smiled slightly, acknowledging his apology. Take care of yourself, Alex. And make good choices, okay? As he walked away, I closed the door and turned back to my own path, feeling a sense of closure. The journey had been arduous, but I emerged stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever lay ahead. The sun set in a blaze of glory, its vibrant hues a promise of the new chapter awaiting me. A chapter of healing, growth, and self-discovery. A new horizon was before me, and I stepped forward with determination and hope, ready to embrace whatever the future held. Mary, are you sure about this? My best friend, Lucy, asked as we sat in my small, but cozy living room. The walls were lined with bookshelves, a testament to my love for fantasy and writing. I sighed, pushing a lock of hair behind my ear. About marrying Alex? Yeah, I am. But his family? That's a whole different story. Lucy raised an eyebrow, her skepticism clear. Especially his mom, huh? I nodded. Mrs. Thompson, Alex's mother, she's something else. Always prying, always judging. And don't get me started on the wedding plans. The doorbell rang, and in came Mrs. Thompson, as if on cue, with her usual air of self-importance. Mary, dear, we need to talk about the wedding dress, she said, barely a hello. I braced myself. What about it, Mrs. Thompson? She waved a dismissive hand. The one you chose, it's just not suitable. I found the perfect one yesterday. It's only a bit over your budget. A bit? I asked, dreading the answer. Well, it's double your budget. But it's worth it, she declared, her tone leaving no room for argument. I exchanged a helpless look with Lucy. Mrs. Thompson, I can't afford that. Nonsense, she snapped. It's your special day. You can cut corners elsewhere. This dress is a must. Feeling cornered, I reluctantly agreed. It was easier than arguing. The next day, we went to the bridal shop. The dress was indeed beautiful, but the price tag made my stomach churn. As I tried it on, Mrs. Thompson gushed over how stunning I looked. It's settled then, she said, clapping her hands together. We'll take it. I hesitated. But the price, Mrs. Thompson. Don't you worry, she interrupted, I'll help you out. Consider it my gift to you. Relief washed over me. Maybe I had misjudged her. Fast forward to the wedding day, the dress was a hit. Everyone complimented me, and I felt like a princess. But after the wedding, when I approached Mrs. Thompson about the dress payment, she conveniently forgot her promise. Mary, dear, I never said I'd pay for the whole thing. I said I'd help. You know, with the choosing. I was flabbergasted. But you said. She waved me off. You must have misunderstood. Anyway, it's done now. No use crying over spilt milk. I stood there, feeling cheated and foolish. Lucy was right. I should have been more careful. It was a Thursday, just like any other, except it wasn't. I was in my home office, the smallest room in the house, cluttered with my writing stuff. The only place where I could find some peace, or so I thought. The sound of the doorbell shattered the quiet. I knew who it was without even looking. Mrs. Thompson had this habit of showing up unannounced, as if our house was a public park. "Mary, dear, I'm here," she bellowed from the living room, not bothering to wait for me to answer the door. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the ordeal ahead. "Hi, Mrs. Thompson," I greeted, trying to sound pleasant. "Oh, there you are, hiding in your little room," she said, peering around with a look of disdain. "You really should get out more, dear." I forced a smile. "I'm actually quite busy with my writing." "Writing, schmitting." She waved her hand dismissively. "You need to live a little. Now, where's the remote? I want to catch my show." As she plopped onto the sofa, turning on the TV, I couldn't help but feel a surge of irritation. My home was turning into her daytime retreat. "Mrs. Thompson, I was hoping to get some work done today," I said, trying to sound firm yet polite. She looked at me, her eyebrows raised. "Oh, don't be silly. Your little stories can wait. I need to relax. You know, I save so much on my electricity bill coming here." I was at a loss for words. The audacity was astounding. And to make matters worse, she headed straight for the kitchen next. "What's for lunch, Mary? I'm starving," she called out, rummaging through the fridge. I followed her, my frustration growing. "Mrs. Thompson, I haven't prepared lunch yet. I was planning to eat later." She shrugged, pulling out ingredients. "No problem, I'll make do with whatever you have. You should really stock up better, though." There I was, watching her take over my kitchen, using my groceries. The sense of intrusion was overwhelming. Alex walked in just then, home for lunch. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, surprise evident in his voice. "Just visiting, darling. Mary and I are having a lovely time," she lied smoothly. I glanced at Alex, hoping he'd say something, but he just shrugged and sat down, turning his attention to the TV. It was clear where he stood, or rather, where he chose to sit, firmly on the fence. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow into my small home office. The walls, lined with shelves of fantasy novels and manuscripts, seemed to close in on me as I sat there, typing away. My world of mythical creatures and grand adventures was a sharp contrast to the reality I was living. The door to my sanctuary burst open with a force that made me jump. Mrs. Thompson stormed in, her face twisted in a mix of disgust and irritation. "Mary, what in the world are you still doing cooped up in here? It's like you're married to that damn computer. There's a real world out there, you know," she exclaimed, her voice laced with contempt. I sighed, pausing my typing. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm working. This is my job, my career." She let out a derisive snort. "Job? You call sitting on your behind all day, making up fairy tales, a job? That's the biggest load of rubbish I've ever heard." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Writing is a legitimate profession. I'm a published author. It's not just a hobby." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Published, schmublished. All this nonsense about dragons and magic wands. It's child's play. Get a real job, contribute something useful to society." Her words were like a barrage of arrows, each one striking its mark. Before I could muster a response, my husband Alex walked in, his expression mirroring his mother's disapproval. "What's the racket about?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Your wife here thinks she's doing the world a favor with her silly stories," Mrs. Thompson said, waving a dismissive hand at my computer. Alex's gaze fell on me, cold and judgmental. "Mary, Mom's right. This isn't a real job. When are you going to stop living in this fantasy world and do something worthwhile? I felt a knot form in my stomach. Alex, I am doing something worthwhile. I'm a writer. My books are sold internationally. He let out a cynical laugh. International? Please, don't make me laugh. How much do you even make from these so-called books? It's a joke. I clenched my fists, trying to control the rising tide of anger and frustration. My writing does contribute. It's not just about the money. It's my passion, my life's work. Alex shook his head, an expression of mock pity on his face. Passion won't pay the bills, Mary. It's time you grew up and got a proper job, one that pays regularly. The conversation was going in circles, their words cutting deeper each time. I felt like I was being suffocated, my dreams and aspirations trampled under their relentless criticism. Look, I don't need this, I finally said, standing up. I don't need to justify my career to anyone. Alex raised an eyebrow. Oh, so now you're getting defensive? Classic. When you can't face the truth, you just run away. I bit back a sharp retort, knowing it would only fuel their fire. Mrs. Thompson, sensing my defeat, added one last jab. Think about what we said, Mary. It's for your own good. You can thank us later when you're living in the real world. With that, they left, leaving me alone in my office, surrounded by my books, my work, my world. But their words echoed in the room, each syllable a reminder of how little they understood or respected me. I wondered how much longer I could endure this environment, where my aspirations were nothing but a source of ridicule. The future, once bright with possibilities, now seemed dim and uncertain. It was a typical Saturday morning, the kind that usually promised relaxation and peace. But for me, it heralded the start of the dreaded weekend ritual. The clock had barely struck 10 when I heard the familiar commotion at the front door. It was Susan, Alex's sister, with her 3 kids in tow. Hey, Mary, Susan called out cheerily as she barged in, the kids already scattering to different corners of the house. Hope we're not too early. I forced a smile, hiding my dismay. No, not at all. Good morning, everyone. Susan, oblivious to my discomfort, plopped herself on the sofa. Phew, what a week. I'm beat. The kids have been driving me up the wall. Thank God for Saturdays, right? I nodded, a sense of resignation settling in. Right. Would you like some coffee? That'd be great, thanks, she said, already engrossed in her phone. As I made my way to the kitchen, dodging toys and narrowly avoiding a collision with the youngest, I couldn't help but feel like an unpaid nanny and housekeeper. By the time I returned with the coffee, the living room resembled a war zone. Susan looked up, unfazed by the chaos. Oh, Mary, could you whip up some of your pancakes? The kids are starving. It wasn't a request, it was an expectation. Sure, I'll get started on that, I replied, my weekend plans vanishing like smoke. The kitchen became my battleground as I juggled pancakes, coffee, and managing the kids. Amidst the flipping and serving, Alex sauntered in, his expression sour. Mary, why do you always buy these expensive ingredients? We need to cut down on expenses, he grumbled, eyeing the breakfast spread. I sighed, trying to keep my frustration in check. Alex, your sister and her kids eat here every weekend. It adds up. He shrugged, dismissive. Well, they're family. You can make do with less fancy stuff. Save some money. The rest of the day passed in a blur of cooking, cleaning, and catering to endless demands. By the time Susan herded her kids out the door, I was drained, both physically and emotionally. As I slumped onto the couch, Alex walked over, a frown on his face. You know, you have to save some money on my nephews and my sister. I looked at him, incredulous. Me? You're the one who never says no to her. And you criticize me for spending too much? He rolled his eyes. Just trying to help you manage better. You could learn to be more economical, you know. The irony of his words was almost laughable. There I was, running a weekend daycare and diner, and he was lecturing me on being economical. I wanted to scream, to tell him how unfair it all was. But I knew it would fall on deaf ears. The house was finally quiet, a stark contrast to the usual daytime chaos. It was my time, the only time I could dedicate to my writing without interruptions. The clock ticked past midnight as I settled into my office, the soft glow of the computer screen my only companion. As I lost myself in the world of my creation, the door creaked open. Alex stood there, his face a mix of annoyance and fatigue. "Mary, are you seriously still up? You know how much this will spike our electricity bill?" I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my cool. "It's the only time I have, Alex. You know how hectic it gets during the day." He leaned against the doorframe, his expression hardening. "Hectic? You mean, taking care of your family? That's what you're supposed to do, Mary. And this night owl routine, it's not helping. Think about the bills, for once." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The bills? Really, Alex? That's your concern right now? Not the fact that I'm sacrificing my sleep, my health, to pursue my career? He rolled his eyes. "Career? You mean this little hobby of yours? Come on, Mary. Be realistic. You need to get your priorities straight." I felt a surge of frustration. This hobby of mine is important to me, Alex. It's my passion, my work. Can't you see that? He shook his head, dismissive. "All I see is unnecessary expenses and a wife who's more interested in her fantasies than her family." The hurt from his words was palpable. I stood up, facing him. "My writing is part of who I am, Alex. I can't just give it up because you think it's impractical." He snorted. "Impractical is an understatement. It's a waste of time and money. You could be doing something more productive, you know." I felt a lump in my throat, the words stinging like a physical blow. I am being productive, in my own way. Why can't you understand that? Alex shrugged, a cold, indifferent gesture. Maybe I would, if it actually brought in some real money. Until then, it's just a nuisance. With that, he turned and left, leaving me alone in the dimly lit room. The words on the screen blurred as tears pricked my eyes. I was struggling to keep my dream alive, and the person who was supposed to support me the most just didn't get it. The kitchen was stifling, the air thick with tension. I was stirring the pot when Alex came in, his mother, Mrs. Thompson, trailing behind him like a shadow. The news he dropped was like a bombshell. "Susan and her husband are taking off for 2 weeks. They need us to watch the kids," Alex announced, a note of finality in his voice. I froze, spoon in hand. 2 weeks? That's a huge ask, Alex. Mrs. Thompson chimed in immediately, her tone sharp. "It's family, Mary. You can't say no to family." I could feel the frustration building up. "But my writing, I have deadlines. I can't be a full-time babysitter." Alex scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're writing? Come on, Mary. It's not like you're penning the next bestseller. Family comes first." I turned to Mrs. Thompson, seeking some support. "Maybe the kids could stay with you?" She recoiled as if I'd suggested something outrageous. "Me? Look after 3 young ones at my age? Absolutely not. I've done my time raising kids." Desperate, I grasped at another solution. "What about hiring a nanny then? Just for those 2 weeks." Both of them looked at me as if I'd grown a second head. "A nanny?" Mrs. Thompson spat out the word. "Why waste money on that when you're already here?" Alex nodded in agreement. "Exactly. We're not made of money, Mary. You need to be sensible about this." I was incredulous. "Sensible? You're asking me to give up 2 weeks of my life, my work, for free, and I'm the one who needs to be sensible?" Alex's face hardened. "It's not a negotiation, Mary. This is what families do for each other. You're part of this family, or have you forgotten? I felt a surge of anger. No, Alex, I haven't forgotten. But it seems like you've forgotten that I have a life and commitments of my own. Mrs. Thompson snorted. Commitments? To those fanciful scribblings of yours? Don't be so dramatic. It's just 2 weeks of babysitting. Feeling cornered, I raised my voice. It's not just babysitting. It's my time, my career. Why can't either of you understand that? Alex's expression turned cold. Because, Mary, in the real world, people don't get to live in their fantasy land. They make sacrifices. They do what's necessary for family. I was shaking with frustration. And what about what's necessary for me? Don't my dreams and aspirations matter to you at all? He leaned in, his voice a low threat. If you don't do this, Mary, it's over. I'll file for divorce. Is that what you want? I recoiled, his words hitting me like a physical blow. The threat of divorce hung in the air, a brutal ultimatum. The day the kids were supposed to arrive felt like the calm before the storm. I watched from the window as Susan's car pulled up. Out tumbled her 3 little ones, each more energetic than the last. Mrs. Thompson, playing the doting grandmother, welcomed them with open arms. The scene was almost comical, a perfect setup for what I had planned. Mary, darling, could you help with the kids? Mrs. Thompson called out, her voice saccharine sweet. I plastered a smile on my face, hiding my brewing plan. Of course, I'll be right there. As I walked into the living room, the chaos was already unfolding. The kids were running around, and Mrs. Thompson looked like she was barely holding it together. Finally, Mary, I thought you'd never come, she snapped, her kind facade slipping. Alex walked in, his expression a mix of annoyance and relief. Mary, make sure they don't wreck the place. I'm going to be in my office. I nodded, my heart racing with anticipation. Actually, I need to go out for a bit. I'll be back soon. Alex's face twisted into a scowl. Go out? Now? Are you kidding me, Mary? You can't leave us with all this. I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. It's just for a bit, Alex. I need to buy some groceries. You'll manage, won't you? Mrs. Thompson glared at me. You're being completely irresponsible, Mary. This is not the time for your little shopping trips. Ignoring her, I grabbed my purse. I won't be long. Keep an eye on the kids. I couldn't help but let out a laugh as I closed the door behind me. The look on their faces was priceless. I didn't go shopping. Instead, I headed straight to the apartment I had rented days before. I had moved all my belongings there when no one was home. It was my escape, my fresh start. Sitting in my new, empty apartment, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The laughter, the sense of freedom was exhilarating. I was finally free from their suffocating grip. I knew Alex would find the divorce papers I left in my office. I imagined his shock, his anger, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. I had taken control of my life again. The phone rang incessantly, messages flooded in. Alex, Mrs. Thompson, even Susan. But I ignored them all. I was done with their drama, their selfishness. That night, I lay in my new bed, the silence a stark contrast to the chaos of my former life. I smiled to myself, thinking about Alex and Mrs. Thompson struggling with the kids. It was their turn to feel overwhelmed, to be pushed to their limits. The aftermath of my departure turned out to be more dramatic than any scene from my books. My phone buzzed constantly with updates from various friends who couldn't resist sharing the chaos unfolding at my former residence. One evening, as I sat in my new apartment, the phone rang with an all-too-familiar number. It was Alex, and from the background noise, I could tell the situation at home was far from under control. Mary, you have to come back. These kids are monsters. Alex's voice was desperate, strained with frustration. I could hear the sounds of things crashing and children screaming. A smirk crept onto my face. Really, Alex? Sounds like you're having a fun time. This isn't funny, Mary. My mom is losing her mind, and I can't handle this alone, he pleaded. I leaned back, enjoying the sweet taste of retribution. Well, Alex, you should have thought about that before. I'm not your nanny or your maid. There was a pause, and then he said, I'm sorry, okay? I should have listened to you, respected your work. Please, just come back. The apology, so rare from Alex, didn't stir any sympathy in me. Sorry doesn't fix everything, Alex. I told you what would happen. I'm done being taken for granted. I hung up, cutting off his protests. The satisfaction was short-lived, though, replaced by a sense of peace and freedom. A few days later, I met up with Lucy for coffee. So, I heard Mrs. Thompson called Susan, demanding she come back early to take her kids, Lucy said, a mischievous glint in her eyes. I laughed, sipping my coffee. Yeah, Susan refused. Said she needed the break. Can you imagine the showdown at that house? Lucy chuckled. And your book? It's a hit, Mary. Everyone's talking about it. I smiled, feeling a sense of achievement wash over me. I put everything into it. It's my best work yet. Lucy leaned in, lowering her voice. The main villain, she's a lot like your mother-in-law, isn't she? I raised an eyebrow, a playful smirk on my lips. Is she? I hadn't noticed. As I walked back to my apartment, I thought about the journey I had been on. Leaving Alex and his controlling family was the best decision I had ever made. I was finally living for myself, my dreams. My latest book was just the start. The villain, reminiscent of Mrs. Thompson, was a hit with the readers. My friends saw the resemblance immediately, but for me, it was more than that. It was a cathartic release, a way to close a painful chapter of my life.
My name is Eliza, and I thought I had it all figured out. At 30, I was married to the love of my life, Michael, and we lived in this cozy, though tiny apartment in one of the city's most sought-after areas. This place, with its quaint charm and memories, was a gift from my late grandmother. Michael and I were like two peas in a pod. He worked in finance, always dressed in those sharp suits that made him look so handsome. I worked in marketing, a job I loved for its creativity and pace. We were the perfect team, or so I thought. One lazy Sunday morning, as we were having breakfast, Michael brought up the topic of family, a conversation we had danced around for a while. Eliza, I've been thinking, Michael began, his eyes serious, about us, about starting a family. I felt a flutter in my heart. Really? That's great. I've always dreamed of a big family, I replied, my voice filled with excitement. Michael smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I want that too. But let's wait until we have a bigger place. This apartment is too small for a family. I nodded, though a part of me felt a bit disappointed. You're right. It makes sense. We should sell this place first, right? Exactly, he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. Once we sell your grandmother's apartment, we can buy a house big enough for, say, 3 or 4 kids. I laughed. 4 kids? That's a mini army. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, but I couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. It was like a small cloud on a sunny day. Family gatherings were a big thing in Michael's family. His parents, Robert and Martha, were the warmest people you'd ever meet. They welcomed me into their family with open arms. Then there was Alex, Michael's younger brother, who was married to Sarah. They had 2 adorable kids, but Sarah and I never clicked. She was always a bit cold and distant, and sometimes downright rude. During one such family gathering at Michael's parents' house, she made a snide remark about my cooking. Eliza, maybe you should stick to marketing and leave the cooking to us homemakers, she said, a fake smile plastered on her face. I remember feeling my cheeks burn with embarrassment. Michael jumped in, trying to lighten the mood. Hey, I love Eliza's cooking, right, Dad? He said, looking at his father, who nodded in agreement. The evening passed with more awkward moments, but I tried to brush them off. I loved Michael, and I was determined to make things work, even with Sarah. As we lay in bed that night, I turned to Michael. Do you think Sarah doesn't like me? Michael, already half asleep, murmured, Don't worry about her. You're amazing, and that's all that matters." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But deep down, I knew that things were not as perfect as they seemed. And little did I know, my world was about to turn upside down. A few weeks had passed since that conversation with Michael about starting a family. The idea of waiting for a bigger home had settled in my mind, though I still held on to the dream of a large family. It was a chilly December morning, and I was tidying up the apartment while Michael was at work. I decided to clean out the coat closet. It was overflowing with jackets and coats we hardly wore. As I was going through Michael's coats, I felt something in the pocket of his winter jacket. Curious, I pulled it out. It was a receipt. At first, I thought it was just another receipt for coffee or something mundane, but this was different. It was a receipt for a scarlet-colored designer bag from a high-end store known for its romantic gifts. My heart skipped a beat. Could this be for me? I wondered aloud, a smile spreading across my face. Michael had never been the type to splurge on extravagant gifts, but maybe this was his way of showing his love, especially with Christmas just around the corner. That evening, when Michael came home, I decided not to mention the receipt. I wanted to act surprised when he gave me the gift. We sat down for dinner, and I couldn't help but feel a bit giddy. "Michael, what are we doing for Christmas?" I asked casually. He looked up from his plate. "Oh, the usual. Dinner at my parents'. Why? You got something special in mind?" I shook my head. No, just the usual sounds perfect. The days leading up to Christmas were busy with work and preparations for the holidays. But that receipt stayed in the back of my mind. I imagined how that scarlet bag would look with my New Year's outfit. Finally, it was Christmas Eve. We were at Michael's parents' house, the whole family buzzing with festive cheer. Presents were piled under the tree, and I kept sneaking glances at them, trying to spot a bag-shaped gift. "Eliza, can you help me with the dessert?" Martha, Michael's mom, called out from the kitchen. "Of course, Martha. Be right there," I replied, happy to lend a hand. As I helped her with the pie, I mentioned the gift. "Michael's been acting a bit secretive. I think he's planning a surprise for me." Martha smiled. "That boy always has something up his sleeve. You're good for him, Eliza." The time came to open the gifts. My heart raced as Michael handed me a medium-sized, neatly wrapped box. It didn't feel like a bag, but maybe. I tore open the wrapping paper to find a set of beautiful porcelain dishes. I looked up at Michael, confused. "Surprise! I know you've been wanting a new set for when we host dinners," he said, smiling. I forced a smile. "They're lovely, Michael. Thank you." But inside, I felt a wave of disappointment wash over me. Where was the scarlet bag? Why did he buy it if not for me? The Christmas dinner at Michael's parents' house was in full swing. The house was filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the warm glow of holiday lights. I tried my best to push the thoughts of the scarlet bag out of my mind and focus on the festivities. "Eliza, could you pass the gravy?" Alex, Michael's brother, asked from across the table. "Sure, here you go," I replied, passing the gravy boat down the table. Michael's parents were beaming, happy to have their family around them. His mother, Martha, always went all out for Christmas, and this year was no exception. The dinner was delicious, and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. After dinner, we all moved to the living room for the gift exchange. I watched as Michael's nieces tore open their presents with glee, their faces lighting up with each new toy they uncovered. It wasn't until we were getting ready to leave that I noticed something that made my heart stop. There, slung over Sarah's shoulder, was a striking scarlet-colored designer handbag. It was unmistakable, the very same bag from the receipt I had found in Michael's coat. My mind raced as we said our goodbyes. I couldn't take my eyes off that bag. It was more than just a purse. It was a symbol of something hidden, something unspoken. On the drive home, the car was filled with an uneasy silence. Michael seemed oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. As the city lights passed by, my mind replayed the evening, but this time I saw it through a different lens. I remembered the fleeting glances that Michael and Sarah had exchanged throughout the night. They were subtle, almost imperceptible, but now they seemed glaringly obvious. The way their eyes met across the room, the brief smiles, the quick, hushed conversations when they thought no one was looking. Is everything okay, Eliza? You've been awfully quiet. Michael's voice broke through my thoughts. I turned to look at him, 1,000 questions on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't bring myself to voice any of them, not yet. I'm just a bit tired, that's all, I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. The rest of the drive home was spent in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. As we lay in bed that night, I couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal creeping in. The man I loved, the life we had built together, suddenly everything seemed like a fragile facade, ready to crumble at any moment. In the days that followed Christmas, my mind was in turmoil, haunted by the sight of Sarah with that scarlet designer handbag and the subtle glances exchanged between her and my husband, Michael. The nagging feeling in my gut told me something wasn't right. One cold evening, as Michael sat idly flipping through TV channels, I decided to confront him. "Michael, can we talk? It's about the bag," I said, my voice betraying a hint of nervousness. He looked at me with a casual expression. "What about it? I just helped Alex pick out a surprise for her, that's all." I took a deep breath. "I found the receipt, Michael. It was in your coat. Why didn't you tell me?" He let out a small laugh, trying to wave it off. "Oh, that. It was just a favor for Alex. You're thinking too much into it, Eliza." His response did little to soothe my suspicions. Later that night, as Michael lay asleep, I mustered up the courage to look through his phone. My heart pounded as I scrolled through his messages and stumbled upon a thread that would change everything. The conversation between Michael and Sarah was not just flirty. It was intimate, revealing a deep and long-standing affair. But the true shock came when I read a message where they discussed the biggest secret of all. Alex's children were actually Michael's. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. My husband had been in a relationship with his brother's wife, and the children I'd come to adore as my nephews were in fact my stepchildren. I felt sick to my stomach as I read message after message. They spoke of love, of a future together, and, most shockingly, of convincing me to sell the apartment and move the money to a joint account. Tears streamed down my face as the magnitude of the betrayal sank in. I was quick to screenshot the messages, sending them to my email for safekeeping. With a heavy heart, I deleted any trace of my actions from his phone and lay back, my mind spinning with the enormity of the deception. The next morning, I played the part of the unsuspecting wife. Over breakfast, Michael brought up selling our apartment, a conversation we'd had previously. "So, what do you think about the sale? It could be a good move for us." I nodded, my mind racing with plans of my own. "Yes, let's sell it. It's time for a new beginning," I replied, my voice steady despite the chaos within. He smiled, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. That's my girl, always so decisive. Little did he know, I was thinking about my future, but it was a future that was starting to look very different from the one we had planned together. Armed with the bitter truth about Michael's affair and the shock of his betrayal, I knew I needed to act smartly and swiftly. I put on a mask of normalcy in front of Michael while planning my next steps. A few days later, I made an appointment with a lawyer, Mrs. Jenkins, a recommendation from a close friend. Sitting in her office, I felt a mix of nervousness and determination. "Mrs. Jenkins, I have proof of my husband's infidelity, and it's not just any affair. He's been involved with his brother's wife, and their children are actually his," I explained, my voice trembling slightly. Mrs. Jenkins listened intently, her expression serious. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Eliza. Let's go over the evidence you have. We need to plan your next steps carefully." I showed her the screenshots of the messages between Michael and Sarah. She took notes, nodding her head thoughtfully. "This is quite damning evidence. We can use this in your favor, especially in terms of the financial settlement," Mrs. Jenkins said. "However, I advise discretion until we have everything in place. Are you prepared to go through with a divorce?" "Yes, I am. I can't be with someone who's betrayed me like this," I replied, a sense of resolve building within me. Mrs. Jenkins outlined a plan. First, we'd secure my financial assets, especially the money from the apartment sale. Then, we'd proceed with filing for divorce, using the evidence to negotiate a favorable settlement. As I left her office, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. There was a long road ahead, but I was ready to take it. Back at home, I continued to act as if everything was normal. Michael, oblivious to my discovery and the impending storm, was focused on the apartment sale. "So, I talked to a real estate agent today. He said we could get a good price for the apartment," Michael said one evening over dinner. "That's great news," I replied, keeping my emotions in check. "Do you think it's a good time to put it on the market?" "Absolutely. The sooner we sell, the sooner we can start looking for a new place," he said, unaware of the irony in his words. As the days passed, I worked closely with Mrs. Jenkins, preparing all the necessary documents and securing my financial position. Every conversation with Michael, every smile, was a performance. But it was a performance I needed to maintain a little longer until everything was ready. The day we listed the apartment for sale, Michael was ecstatic. "This is it, Eliza, our new beginning." Little did he know, it was indeed the beginning of something new, but not the future he envisioned. My heart ached with the pain of betrayal, but I was determined to come out of this stronger. The plot I was weaving wasn't just for retribution, it was for my independence and a fresh start. As the new year approached, the plans I had been carefully laying with Mrs. Jenkins were coming together. My facade of normalcy with Michael remained intact, even as my heart grew heavier each day. The final act of my plan was set to unfold during the New Year's Eve party at Michael's parents' house. It was there that I would reveal everything. The evening of the party arrived, and the house was buzzing with the usual festive cheer. Michael's parents had outdone themselves with decorations, and the air was filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. I mingled with the family, all the while feeling like I was in the eye of a storm. Michael was in high spirits, completely unaware of what was about to happen. "Eliza, you seem a bit quiet tonight. Everything okay?" Michael asked as we found a moment alone in the kitchen. "Just thinking about the new year and all the changes it'll bring," I said, my voice steady. He smiled and wrapped his arm around me. "It's going to be our best year yet." If only he knew. As midnight approached, everyone gathered around with glasses in hand, ready to count down to the new year. I took a deep breath, knowing that my moment was near. As the clock struck 12 and everyone cheered, I turned to Michael. "Before we celebrate too much, I have a special gift for you," I said, my voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I handed him a small, neatly wrapped box. The room quieted as all eyes turned to us. Michael, looking surprised, unwrapped the box. Inside were the divorce papers and a printout of the messages I had found on his phone. His face drained of color as he realized what they were. "What is this, Eliza?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "It's over, Michael. I know about you and Sarah. I know about everything," I said, my voice clear and strong. The room erupted into chaos. Michael's parents looked shocked, his brother Alex was speechless, and Sarah, who had been standing near the back, looked like she might faint. "What are you talking about, Eliza?" Michael's mother asked, confusion and concern in her voice. "Michael has been having an affair with Sarah, and her children are his," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Michael tried to speak, but no words came out. Sarah started crying, and Alex, who had been silent up until now, turned to his brother. "Is this true, Michael? Tell me this isn't true." Alex's voice was filled with a mix of anger and disbelief. Michael couldn't meet his brother's eyes. The truth was out there for everyone to see, and there was no escaping it. The revelation at the New Year's Eve party sent shockwaves through the room. Michael's family, once a picture of unity and joy, was now a scene of chaos and disbelief. The truth about Michael's affair with Sarah and their plan to embezzle the money from my apartment sale was out, and the reactions were immediate and intense. Michael's mother, Martha, looked at him with a mix of disbelief and heartbreak. "Michael, how could you? And with Sarah? To think you were planning to steal from Eliza and run away?" Before Michael could respond, I added, "And it's not just the affair. They were planning to use the money from the sale of my apartment to leave the country." The room went silent. The gravity of the betrayal hung heavy in the air. Then, Martha, overcome with emotion, fainted, causing a stir as family members rushed to her side. Michael stood there, looking lost and defeated. His father, Robert, shook his head in disgust. "I can't believe you would do this to your own family," To your own brother. Alex, who had been silent, his face a mask of shock and hurt, finally spoke. Michael, I don't even know who you are anymore. Sarah was sobbing uncontrollably, her tears doing little to garner any sympathy. The family was too stunned and hurt by the depth of their deceit. With Martha being attended to and the room in disarray, I knew this was my moment to make my stand. I raised my voice, ensuring everyone heard me clearly. I am filing for divorce from Michael, and I won't just stop there. I will be seeking financial compensation for this betrayal from both Michael and Sarah. The words felt empowering to say out loud. It was a declaration of my independence and my refusal to be a victim of their selfishness. Michael tried to approach me, a look of desperation in his eyes. Eliza, please, let me explain. I held up my hand to stop him. There's nothing you can say to justify what you've done. You and Sarah have made your choices. Now, you'll have to live with the consequences. The months following the New Year's Eve revelation were a whirlwind. The divorce proceedings were tough, but with each passing day, I felt a sense of liberation growing within me. I was no longer bound to a relationship built on lies and deceit. One sunny afternoon, after finalizing the last of the divorce papers, I sat in a cafe, a cup of coffee in hand, reflecting on the journey I had been through. You look like you're a million miles away, my friend Clara said as she joined me at the table. Just thinking about everything that's happened, I replied, offering a small smile. You've handled it all with such grace, Eliza. I'm proud of you, she said, her eyes full of genuine sympathy. Thanks, Clara. It wasn't easy, but I feel like I can finally start fresh now, I said, feeling the weight of the past months lift off my shoulders. With the divorce settled, I had kept the apartment and received a significant financial settlement from Michael. As for him, his reputation had taken a severe hit, and he lost his job due to the scandal. Sarah and Alex had also gone their separate ways, with the family ties deeply strained. I heard Michael moved out of the city, Clara mentioned, stirring her coffee. Yes, he did. And honestly, I'm relieved. It's easier to move on knowing he's not around, I admitted. And what's next for Eliza? Clara asked, a hint of excitement in her voice. I thought for a moment. I want to focus on myself for a while. Maybe travel, pick up some hobbies that I've been neglecting, and who knows, perhaps even start dating again when I'm ready. That sounds wonderful. You deserve all the happiness in the world, she said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. As we chatted and laughed, I felt a sense of hope for the future. The pain of the past was still there, a faint scar on my heart, but it no longer defined me. I had emerged stronger and more self-assured. The story of my marriage and its dramatic end would always be a part of me, but it was now just that, a part of my past. Ahead of me lay a path filled with new possibilities and opportunities for growth and happiness. It was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of something new, something entirely my own. A fresh start, a new beginning, and a life that I was ready to embrace fully.
I grew up knowing Lucas, mostly from a distance. We were from the same neighborhood, and our paths often crossed on the street, but our worlds were vastly different. I came from a simple family. We didn't have much, but we had each other. Lucas, on the other hand, was part of the well-known Grayson family, who owned the largest company in town. Everyone knew them, and almost everyone envied them. One day, as I was walking home from my job at the local grocery store, Lucas approached me. It was unexpected. We barely spoke before this. "Hey, Tiffany," he greeted, flashing a smile that made many girls in our town go weak in the knees. "Hi, Lucas," I replied, a bit surprised. "How are you?" "Good, thanks. Look, I was wondering if you'd like to grab a coffee tomorrow." The invite took me off guard. "Coffee? With you?" "Yeah, I mean, we've known each other for years, but never really talked. I'd like to change that. What do you say?" I hesitated, then said, "All right, why not?" From that day, things moved quickly. Our coffee date turned into dinners, movie nights, and long walks. We spent days getting to know each other. The more time I spent with him, the more I realized we had a lot in common. One evening, as we were walking by the river, Lucas turned to me and said, Tiffany, these past few weeks with you have been amazing. I've never felt this way about anyone before. I looked up at him. Lucas, this is all so new to me. I never expected any of this. He took my hands in his. Neither did I, but now that we're here, I don't want to let you go. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Before I knew it, Lucas was on one knee holding out a simple ring. Tiffany, will you marry me? Tears filled my eyes. Yes, Lucas. Yes, I will. The news of our engagement spread quickly. Everyone was surprised. No one saw it coming. But here we were, two people from different worlds, finding love in the most unexpected place. As the wedding preparations began, I couldn't help but feel like I was living in a dream. The Grayson family was beyond supportive. They welcomed me with open arms, especially Lucas's mother, Mrs. Harriet Grayson. She was thrilled about our union and took charge of most of the wedding arrangements. Tiffany, she said to me one day, I want you to have the best wedding. You're going to be a Grayson now. Thank you, Mrs. Grayson. I never imagined any of this, I replied, overwhelmed. You deserve it, dear. Lucas is lucky to have you. The big day arrived sooner than we expected. As I stood at the altar, looking at Lucas, I felt grateful for this unexpected turn my life had taken. Little did I know, things were about to change in ways I could never have anticipated. The move to our new home was swift, just days after our wedding. It was a quaint, charming place, not too large, with a hint of vintage charm. Lucas had picked it out, saying it was perfect for us to start our life together. From the moment we stepped in, I felt an unexpected chill, not from the house itself, but from Lucas. The warmth he had exuded throughout our courtship seemed to evaporate. Our rooms echoed with silence, broken only by the mundane conversations about household chores or grocery lists. One evening, after setting up the dinner table, I tried initiating a light conversation. The house feels cozy, doesn't it? We can maybe get some plants for the balcony? Lucas, who was absorbed in some paperwork, merely grunted in reply. Sensing his detachment, I attempted to bridge the distance. Lucas, is everything okay? He looked up, seemingly irritated. Yes, why wouldn't it be? I just feel you've been distant since we moved in. I hesitated. Did I do something wrong? He sighed heavily, avoiding eye contact. It's nothing. I'm just busy with work. But you're always here, at home, with me, I pointed out, trying to understand his sudden change. Lucas's voice hardened. Look, Tiffany, I have a lot on my mind. The marriage, the house, my work responsibilities. It's all a bit overwhelming. I felt a pang in my heart. I thought we were in this together, I murmured. He didn't respond, just got up and headed to our bedroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the now cold dinner. The days that followed were no different. Mornings were a hurried affair, with Lucas often leaving before I was even fully awake. Evenings were cold and silent. I tried engaging him, suggesting we go out or inviting friends over, but he always had an excuse. Mrs. Harriet Grayson, during one of her visits, sensed the tension. Tiffany, she whispered, pulling me aside. Is everything okay between you two? I bit my lip, trying to hold back tears. I don't know, Mrs. Grayson. He's changed. She gave my hand a comforting squeeze. Give it time, dear. Marriage is a big step. Perhaps he's just adjusting. I nodded, but deep down, doubts were setting in. Was this how my married life was going to be? In the shadow of Lucas's coldness? Determined to find answers, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Days turned into weeks, and the cold atmosphere in our home continued. The initial days of trying to break the ice with Lucas had led to a routine of silence. I'd find myself often staring at the wall, counting the minutes until he'd return home. But when he did, it was as if I was living with a stranger. One evening, I decided to cook his favorite meal, hoping it might cheer him up or at least get him to talk. As I set the table, I thought of our earlier days, and how he'd compliment my cooking. Now, the very idea of him sitting to eat with me seemed like a distant dream. Lucas walked in later than usual. I greeted him with a hesitant smile. "Hey, I made your favorite tonight." He glanced at the table and then at me. "I ate out." "Oh," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Okay." There was a moment of silence. "Lucas," I started, my voice firm, "we need to talk." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Not now, Tiffany." "When then? You've been distant for weeks. I don't even know what's going on in your life anymore." Lucas looked at me, his face expressionless. "It's just work. There's a lot of pressure." I nodded slowly. "But we used to talk, Lucas. We used to share. Now I feel like I'm living with a ghost." Lucas looked away, not meeting my eyes. "I need some space, Tiffany." The words felt like a blow. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Space? We live together, Lucas. We're married. If there's a problem, we should be facing it together." He didn't reply, just turned and headed towards our bedroom, leaving me standing there, lost and confused. The next morning, I woke up to find him already gone. The bed was neatly made, and a note lay on the pillow next to mine. "Had to leave early. Don't wait up." Days passed, and the pattern continued. Lucas would leave early and return late, often after I'd gone to bed. We became like two ships passing in the night, with barely any interaction. One afternoon, as I sat in the living room flipping through an old photo album, tears streamed down my face. Pictures of our early days, our smiles, our closeness seemed like memories from another lifetime. Mrs. Grayson dropped by unannounced. Noticing my tears, she sat next to me, concern evident on her face. "Tiffany, what's going on?" Wiping my tears, I replied, "It's Lucas, Mrs. Grayson. He's changed. I feel so alone." She looked at the pictures and then at me. "Marriage has its ups and downs, dear, but communication is key." I nodded. "I've tried talking to him, but he shuts me out." Mrs. Grayson patted my hand gently. "Then maybe it's time to take a different approach. Find out what's really bothering him." Taking a deep breath, I nodded. "You're right. I need to get to the bottom of this." Determined to uncover the mystery behind Lucas's behavior, I decided it was time to take matters into my own hands. The nights were the hardest. Alone in the vast mansion, I'd often find myself waiting for Lucas to walk through the door. But more often than not, the ticking of the clock was the only sound that kept me company. One evening, after yet another night alone, desperation took over. I decided to call Mrs. Grayson. Perhaps she knew something I didn't. Maybe she could talk some sense into Lucas. "Mrs. Grayson?" I started hesitantly when she picked up the phone. "It's Tiffany. I was hoping to speak with you about Lucas." There was a brief pause, then in a softer tone, she replied, "Oh, Tiffany, what's the matter?" Taking a deep breath, I confessed, "Lucas hasn't been coming home. He's hardly ever here, and I don't know what to do." To my surprise, her tone shifted instantly. "Tiffany, my son has responsibilities, bigger than you might understand. He's managing a massive company, trying to maintain our family's legacy." Stammering, I tried to explain. "I understand, but he doesn't come home. At all. Nights are so lonely." Mrs. Grayson's voice hardened. "You knew what you were getting into when you married him. You need to adjust and be grateful for the life he's providing you." Tears filled my eyes. "I just want our marriage to be how I imagined." There was a cold silence. Then she said, "Lucas mentioned you might be difficult, always wanting more. You should be thankful for what you have, Tiffany." The conversation ended shortly after, leaving me even more bewildered and alone. Whatever Lucas had told his mother had painted me in a terrible light. What was he hiding? Why was he driving this wedge between his family and me? It was clear that I needed answers, and I was determined to find them. I enlisted the help of an old classmate, David, now a private detective. Within days, he presented me with photos that made my heart sink. Days turned into nights, and my sense of isolation grew. Each evening felt like an echo of the previous one. I'd walk through the grand halls, touching the expensive decor, but feeling more disconnected than ever. One gloomy afternoon, while I sat in the drawing room staring blankly at the pouring rain outside, my phone vibrated. It was an unfamiliar number. "Hello?" I said hesitantly. "Tiffany, dear. It's Aunt Margaret, Lucas's aunt." Surprised, I replied, "Oh, hello, Aunt Margaret. It's nice to hear from you." Her voice was warm, but there was a hint of concern. "I just wanted to check in and see how you were feeling, dear. It's been so long since our last chat." I was puzzled. "I'm fine, thank you. Why do you ask?" She hesitated, then said, "Well, Lucas mentioned you'd been struggling lately. He said you'd been having a tough time adjusting and dealing with some personal health issues." I blinked in confusion. "Health issues?" Aunt Margaret continued. "Yes, he mentioned you were battling severe depression and that he's been so worried about you." The weight of realization hit me. This was the story Lucas was spinning to his family. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. I don't know where he got that from, Aunt Margaret. I've been lonely, yes, but I'm not suffering from depression." Aunt Margaret sounded genuinely surprised. "Oh, well, he seemed so concerned. He even said he was getting you the best treatment and medications." My mind raced. Not only had Lucas been lying about his whereabouts, but he'd also been crafting an elaborate tale about my supposed condition to his family. Trying to keep my composure, I said, "Thank you for your concern, Aunt Margaret. I'll have to talk to Lucas about this." Before we ended the call, she added, "Well, since you're feeling better, I'd love for you to come to my birthday celebration next week. I'm inviting close family, and it would be lovely to see you." "Of course," I replied, trying to mask the turmoil inside me. "I'd love to." Once the call ended, my emotions were a whirlwind. Lucas's deceit ran deeper than I'd imagined. But Aunt Margaret's invitation gave me an idea. It would be the perfect place to confront him, surrounded by the very family he'd lied to. As I pondered my next moves, I felt a newfound determination. Lucas had woven a web of lies, but I was ready to expose the truth. The festive atmosphere of Aunt Margaret's birthday celebration was in full swing when I decided it was time. As guests laughed and chatted, I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the confrontation. Lucas stood amidst a group, laughing at some joke, appearing to be the perfect son and husband. I approached him, my hands clutching the jars of medication, each one empty. The murmurs of the gathering dimmed as all eyes turned to us. With every step, my resolve hardened. "Lucas," I said, my voice loud enough to command the attention of the room. I placed the medicine jars in front of him, their labels glaringly evident. He glanced at them, his laughter fading, confusion clouding his eyes. "What's this?" he asked, his tone flippant. "These are the medications I'm supposedly on," I responded. "The ones you've been telling everyone you've been buying for me." He stared at them, genuinely puzzled. "Why are you showing me these?" He picked up one jar, examining it before carelessly tossing it onto the floor. "This," I said, pointing at the shattered jar, "is how much you know about my so-called illness. You can't even recognize the medication you claim to buy for me." Whispers swept through the room as realization dawned on the guests. The air grew thick with tension. Lucas's face drained of color. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his eyes betrayed his panic. Aunt Margaret stepped forward, her face a mask of shock and anger. "Lucas, is this true? Have you been lying to us about Tiffany's health?" He couldn't respond, cornered by the weight of his deceit. The room was a sea of accusing eyes, each one demanding answers. "I trusted you, Lucas," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "Not only did you betray me, but you also lied to your family, to everyone who cared about us." He looked down, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The room remained silent, the weight of the revelation sinking in. All the pretense, the stories, the lies, they had finally caught up with him. With the shattered medicine jar as the only sound, the room was thick with tension. Lucas had gone pale, his confident facade crumbled. I wasn't done, though. With one last ace up my sleeve, I took out the pictures David had given me. Pictures that showed Lucas with a woman who wasn't me. "Recognize her?" I asked, handing the pictures to Aunt Margaret, who was closest to me. She looked at them, her eyes widening with recognition and dismay. "Oh no, Lucas, not her," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Lucas shifted uncomfortably, looking like a deer caught in headlights. "What is it, Aunt Maggie?" one of the cousins, Sarah, asked. Aunt Margaret looked up, her expression grave. "This is Isabella Travers. She's well known in our community, for all the wrong reasons." I felt a chill. The way Aunt Margaret said it, it seemed this Isabella had a history with the family. Lucas's mother, Mrs. Grayson, approached and took a look at the photos. The color drained from her face. "I thought you were done with her after—" She stopped, shaking her head. "I can't believe you'd do this to Tiffany, to all of us." Lucas was cornered, looking between the two women with panic evident in his eyes. "Mom, it's not what you think," he started, but Aunt Margaret interrupted him. "We all warned you about her years ago, Lucas. We thought marrying Tiffany would have set you on the right path. Isabella is nothing but trouble." Lucas seemed to shrink, his posture slouched and defeated. "It's not like that. I mean, it started out, but it's complicated." "Complicated?" I echoed, my voice sharp. "You marry me, lie about my health, and all the while you're with her? Explain that complication to me." Lucas opened his mouth, then closed it, no words coming out. He looked broken, defeated, but I felt no sympathy. He had deceived everyone, and it was time for the truth. Aunt Margaret, visibly upset, handed the photos back to me. "Tiffany, I'm so sorry," she said. "You deserve so much better than this." I nodded, looking at the pictures. "Thank you, Aunt Maggie. All I wanted was the truth." The room was filled with murmured conversations as the party guests processed the revelations. Lucas looked around, no friends in sight, no allies to defend him. He had played his games, and now he was facing the consequences. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The truth was out, and I was ready to move forward, away from the lies and deceit that had become my life. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The beauty outside stood in stark contrast to the turmoil that had just occurred inside the Grayson household. I sat on the porch steps, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. David approached me, his usual confident demeanor replaced with genuine concern. "Are you okay?" he asked. I looked up, forcing a smile. "I will be. Thanks for everything, David. Without you, I'd still be in the dark." He sat down next to me. "I just wish I could have done more. No one should go through what you did." I sighed. "It's done now. All that's left is to move forward." He looked out towards the horizon. "What will you do now?" "I haven't decided," I replied. "But I know I can't stay here. I need a fresh start somewhere away from all this." David nodded. "You deserve happiness, Tiffany. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I smiled, feeling a warmth despite the situation. "Thank you, David." Inside, the murmur of voices continued. Some of the family were angry, some confused, but the truth was out, and everyone knew it. I had no intentions of going back inside. Not now, not ever. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out and saw a message from Mrs. Grayson. "I'm so sorry for what happened. We will refuse Lucas financial support. He can forget about inheriting the family company. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. Take care of yourself." I replied with a simple "thank you" and put the phone back in my pocket. After a while, David stood up. "I should get going. If you ever need anything, Tiffany, just call, okay?" I nodded. "I will. Thanks again, David." He smiled, patting my shoulder reassuringly, and walked away. The house behind me felt cold, unwelcoming. The only thing tying me to it was the memories, and now they were all tainted. The next morning, I packed up my belongings, leaving behind everything that reminded me of Lucas and the life I thought I had. Aunt Margaret offered to help, but I declined. This was something I had to do alone. As I drove away, I didn't look back. The house, Lucas, the lies, they were all behind me. Ahead lay a new journey, new beginnings, and a chance at happiness. The end was also a new beginning. I knew challenges awaited, but I also knew I was strong enough to face them. With each mile I put between myself and the past, the brighter my future looked. The road ahead was open, and I was ready to embark on my next adventure, free from the shadows of deceit. And as I drove into the rising sun, I felt a sense of hope and renewal, knowing that the best was yet to come. It was just another shift at the hospital. My name's Eliza Bennett, a 40-year-old ER nurse who's seen it all. I like my job, even though it's tough sometimes. The hospital's short on specialists, so I often pull double duty, working in the ER and wherever else I'm needed. Tonight, I was in the ER, same as always. My husband, Michael? Well, he's been busy building his political career, working as an assistant to the mayor. We don't talk much about my work. He's not too interested. We've been living our separate lives under the same roof, each absorbed in our own worlds. We never had kids. I wanted them for a long time, but it just didn't happen. Eventually, Michael told me he was fine without children. He said he liked the quiet, so it's just been the two of us, living in a kind of silent agreement. The ER was buzzing with the usual chaos, nurses and doctors rushing around, the constant beeping of machines. I was checking on a patient when I heard the ambulance siren. It was a call from a residential area, something about a sick baby. I've always had a soft spot for kids, so I volunteered to go. My colleague, John, was driving the ambulance. He's a good guy, always has a joker ready to lighten the mood. We've worked together for years. "Ready for another adventure, Elisa?" John asked as we hopped into the ambulance. "Always," I replied with a half smile. We chatted about trivial things on the way, the weather, a new restaurant in town. It was a way to keep the tension at bay, to stay calm before facing whatever awaited us. The address led us to a fancy neighborhood, the kind where each house looked like it could be on a postcard. John whistled as we pulled up to a large, well-lit house. "Someone's doing well for themselves," he commented. I just nodded, grabbing my medical bag. We were met at the door by a young woman, probably in her early 20s. She was holding a baby, and I could see the worry etched on her face. "Please, help my baby. He's got a fever, and he won't stop crying," she pleaded, her voice cracking with emotion. "Let's take a look," I said, trying to sound reassuring. Her mother, an older woman with kind eyes, stood by her side. I could see where the young woman got her looks. They led us into a spacious living room where I began examining the baby. I didn't know it then, but that night was going to change everything. My ordinary life was about to get a whole lot more complicated. As I examined the baby, I could tell something was wrong. He was burning up with fever and seemed to be having spasms. I needed to act fast. "John, we need to cool him down now," I said urgently. John nodded, quickly understanding the situation. "Got it, Eliza. I'll get some ice packs and a cool cloth." While John fetched the supplies, I turned to the young woman. "I'm Eliza. What's your baby's name?" She was on the verge of tears. "His name is Liam. He was fine this afternoon, and then suddenly—" "It's okay," I said gently. "We're going to take care of Liam." John came back with the ice packs and a cloth. We worked together, trying to bring down Liam's fever. The young woman, who I learned was named Sophia, and her mother watched us, anxiety written all over their faces. "Is he going to be okay?" Sophia's mother asked. She was trying to stay strong, but I could hear the worry in her voice. "We're doing everything we can," I assured her. After a few tense minutes, Liam's fever started to come down. He stopped convulsing and began to calm. Relief washed over Sophia's face. "Thank you," she whispered. "We should still get him to a hospital to be checked over," I suggested. "Better safe than sorry." Sophia nodded. "Of course, whatever he needs." As we prepared to move Liam, the front door opened. I didn't pay it much attention until I heard a familiar voice. "What's going on here? Sophia, are you okay?" I froze. That voice. I'd know it anywhere. It was Michael, my husband. I turned slowly, and there he was, standing in the doorway. Our eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. "Eliza, what are you doing here?" Michael's voice was a mix of surprise and something else. Fear, maybe. "I could ask you the same question," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. Sophia looked from Michael to me and back again. "You two know each other?" Michael opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked like a deer caught in headlights. "Eliza is my wife," he finally managed to say. I confirmed, "Yes, I am his wife." The room went silent. Sophia's eyes widened, and her mother let out a gasp. I could feel John's eyes on me, full of questions. "Your wife?" Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. She looked at Michael, hurt and confusion written all over her face. Michael didn't answer. He just stood there, looking like he wished the ground would swallow him up. In that moment, I realized my ordinary life was over. Everything had changed, and there was no going back. The room was thick with tension. I couldn't believe Michael was here, in this house, with Sophia and her baby. I felt like I was in some kind of bad dream. Sophia was the first to break the silence. "Michael, why is she calling you her husband?" Michael finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sophia, I can explain." "Explain?" Sophia's voice rose. "Explain why my baby's nurse is claiming to be your wife." I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my response. I took a deep breath. "Because I am his wife. We've been married for 10 years. Sophia's face crumpled. "But you told me you were divorced." Michael ran a hand through his hair, looking desperate. "I know, and I'm sorry. I was going to tell you, You just what?" Sophia's mother cut in, her voice sharp. "Lied to my daughter, to us." John, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Maybe we should give you some space to talk this out." I nodded, grateful for his intervention. "Yes, we should go. Liam's stable, but he still needs to be seen at the hospital." As John and I started to move Liam's carrier, the front door opened again. Another surprise. This time, an older man walked in. I recognized him immediately. Mayor Thomas Harrington, Michael's boss. "What's all this commotion?" the mayor asked, looking around the room. Sophia rushed to him. "Dad, this is complicated." The mayor's eyes landed on Michael. "Michael, what's going on?" Before Michael could respond, Sophia blurted out, "Michael's married, Dad, and he lied to me about it." The mayor's expression turned from confusion to anger. "Married? Is this true, Michael?" Michael nodded, unable to meet the mayor's gaze. "Yes, sir, it's true." I could see the wheels turning in the mayor's head. "And you're his wife?" he asked, looking at me. "Yes, I am. I confirmed. The mayor shook his head. I can't believe this. Michael, you've been working for me for over a year, and I had no idea. Michael tried to say something, but the mayor held up a hand to stop him. Save it. I need some time to process this. Sophia was crying now, her mother comforting her. The mayor looked at his daughter and granddaughter with a mixture of sadness and anger. I felt like I was watching everything from a distance. This was my life falling apart, but it felt like a scene from a TV show. As John and I finally left the house with Liam, I couldn't help but glance back. Michael was standing there looking lost. Part of me felt sorry for him, but another part of me was angry, so very angry. I had no idea what was going to happen next. All I knew was that my ordinary life was gone, replaced by something much messier and more complicated. After dropping Liam off at the hospital and making sure he was in good hands, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. I needed answers. I needed to talk to Michael. I drove home, my mind racing. When I got there, Michael's car was in the driveway. I took a deep breath and went inside. Michael was sitting at the kitchen table, looking like he hadn't moved since he got home. He looked up when I came in, his expression a mix of guilt and fear. Eliza, He started, but trailed off. I sat down across from him. I want to know everything, Michael. How long has this been going on? Why did you lie to her? To me? Michael took a deep breath. It started a year ago, at a work event. I met Sophia and we hit it off. I know I should have told her the truth, but I saw an opportunity. Opportunity? I couldn't hide the hurt in my voice. With her being the mayor's daughter, I thought... He paused, struggling to find the words. I thought it could help my career. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. So, our marriage, our life together, it meant nothing to you? It's not like that, Eliza. I do care about you, but I felt stuck. I thought I needed more. And a baby. Did you plan that too? My voice was rising now, anger mixing with the hurt. No, that was an accident. But when Sophia told me, I thought maybe it could all work out. I could have this new life. A new life? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And what about our life? What about me? Michael looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I don't know. I thought maybe we could get a divorce, and it would be better for both of us. So, you were just going to leave me? After 10 years? I was going to talk to you about it. I just needed to figure things out first. I shook my head, feeling a mix of sadness and disbelief. You were going to leave me and marry her, weren't you? Michael didn't answer, but he didn't need to. I knew the truth. I can't believe this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't believe you would do this to me. I'm sorry, Eliza. I never meant to hurt you. Sorry doesn't fix this, Michael. You've lied to me, to Sophia, to everyone, and now everything's falling apart. Michael looked like he wanted to say more, but I stood up. I need some time to think, to figure out what I'm going to do. As I walked away, I could feel Michael's eyes on me, but I didn't look back. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, but one thing was clear. Everything had changed, and there was no going back. The next few days were a blur. I went to work, but my mind was elsewhere. Michael tried to talk to me, but I couldn't deal with it. Not yet. Then, one evening, I found myself at Sophia's doorstep. I needed to talk to her, to understand her side of the story. I rang the bell, and after a moment, she opened the door. Eliza? Sophia looked surprised to see me. I think we need to talk, I said. She hesitated, but then nodded, stepping aside to let me in. We sat down in her living room, an awkward silence hanging in the air. Why are you here? Sophia finally asked. I want to understand. What did Michael tell you about us? Sophia took a deep breath. He said he was divorced, that he'd been single for a while. I had no idea about you until you showed up that night. I nodded, feeling a pang of sadness. And the baby? Liam? She looked down, tears welling in her eyes. He was a surprise. Michael said we could be a family, that he wanted to be there for us. I believed him. I could hear the pain in her voice, and despite everything, I felt sorry for her. I'm sorry, Sophia. I'm sorry he lied to both of us. She wiped her eyes. I'm sorry too. I never wanted to be part of something like this. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. Did you love him? I asked, not sure if I wanted to know the answer. Sophia looked up, her expression sad. I thought I did. But now, I don't know what to believe. He lied about everything. I nodded, understanding all too well. Yeah, I get that. We talked for a while longer, sharing our stories, our confusion, our pain. It was strange, talking like this with the other woman, but it was also comforting in a way. When I left, I felt a little lighter, like I'd let go of some of the anger and hurt. It wasn't gone, not by a long shot, but it was a start. As I drove home, I thought about Michael, about our marriage, about everything that had happened. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't stay in limbo forever. I needed to make a decision, for my sake and for my future. The weeks following the revelation of Michael's betrayal felt like a stormy sea, each day tossing me between waves of anger, disbelief, and an unexpected sense of liberation. As I braced myself for the legal battles ahead, the reality of the situation became crystal clear. It was me and Mayor Harrington versus Michael. The day of the trial dawned like any other, but with a weight that felt like a heavy cloud hanging over me. Walking into the courtroom, I was a mix of nerves and determination. Mayor Harrington gave me a nod of solidarity as we took our seats. The courtroom buzzed with the quiet chatter of spectators and the shuffling of papers. When Michael walked in, escorted by his lawyer, my heart raced. He avoided eye contact, but I could feel the tension between us. The trial began with the mayor's case. His lawyer presented evidence of Michael's deception, how he had lied about being divorced and manipulated Sophia, the mayor's daughter. Photographs, texts, and emails painted a clear picture of Michael's duplicity. Mayor Harrington himself took the stand, his disappointment and anger toward Michael evident in his testimony. Sophia also testified, her voice trembling as she recounted the lies Michael had fed her. Then, it was my turn. My lawyer laid out the case against Michael, highlighting his infidelity and deceit. I took the stand, my hands shaking slightly. The lawyer asked me to recount how I discovered Michael's affair and the events that followed. As a nurse, I am trained to stay calm in emergencies, I began, my voice steady. But nothing could have prepared me for the shock of finding my husband with another woman and a child he had kept hidden from me. The courtroom was silent, hanging on my every word. I spoke about our marriage, the struggles, and how Michael's ambition had slowly overshadowed our relationship. When it was Michael's turn, his defense seemed weak. His lawyer tried to downplay the situation, suggesting misunderstandings and miscommunications. But the evidence was overwhelming. Michael himself stumbled through his testimony, his excuses sounding hollow and insincere. As the trial proceeded, I felt a growing sense of empowerment. For years, I had lived in the shadow of Michael's ambitions, but here, in this courtroom, I was reclaiming my life. Finally, the judge delivered the verdict. Michael was found guilty of fraud and deceit in both cases. There was a murmur in the courtroom, a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. As we exited the courtroom, reporters swarmed around, but I declined to comment. This victory was not about public attention. It was personal, a step towards healing and moving on. Driving home, the weight of the past weeks began to lift. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of hope. The trial had not just been about legal justice, it was a journey to self-discovery and reclaiming the narrative of my own life. That evening, as I sat quietly at home, I realized the trial was more than a closure. It was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I was not just a spectator in my life, but the author of my own story. The trial was over, but its ripples were still felt in every corner of my life. The legal victory was clear, but the emotional landscape was more complicated. I had won, but at what cost? The weeks following the trial were a blur. I threw myself into work, finding solace in the routine of my shifts at the hospital. It was during one of these shifts that I ran into Sophia, the mayor's daughter, in the hospital corridor. "Hey," she said quietly, her eyes reflecting a shared understanding of pain and betrayal. "Hi, Sophia," I replied. "How are you holding up?" "It's been tough," she admitted, cradling her baby in her arms. "But I'm managing. And you?" "Day by day," I said, offering a small smile. "Taking it day by day." We exchanged a few more words before parting ways, a silent acknowledgement of the strange bond that now linked us. Back at home, the loneliness of the empty house sometimes felt overwhelming. I had grown used to Michael's absence, but the finality of the divorce brought a new kind of solitude. It was during these quiet moments that I would often find myself reflecting on the past, on the choices I had made, and the ones that had been made for me. One evening, as I was sorting through old papers, I came across an envelope addressed to me. It was from Michael. My first instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. As I read his letter, his words of apology and explanation felt empty. He talked about his mistakes, his regrets, and his desire to make things right. But it was too little, too late. I crumpled the letter and tossed it into the trash, feeling a surge of anger, and then, surprisingly, a sense of release. Michael was part of my past, but he would not define my future. A few days later, I received a call from Mayor Harrington. He wanted to meet for coffee, to thank me personally for my courage during the trial. Sitting across from him in the small cafe, I felt a sense of respect for the man who had stood by his daughter and supported me through the legal ordeal. "Thank you for meeting me, Eliza," he said, his voice sincere. "Your strength during the trial was admirable." "I did what I had to do," I replied, stirring my coffee, "for myself and for Sophia. I want you to know that the city council is here to support you," he continued. "If there's anything you need, don't hesitate to reach out." I nodded, appreciative of his offer, but determined to stand on my own 2 feet. As I walked back home, I realized that the aftermath of the trial was not just about picking up the pieces, it was about building something new. My marriage to Michael had ended, but my life was still very much in progress. In the following weeks, I made a conscious decision to focus on myself. I reconnected with old friends, took up new hobbies, and even began considering furthering my education in nursing. The journey was not easy. There were days of doubt and moments of loneliness. But there was also a newfound sense of freedom and possibility. I was no longer tied to Mikhail's ambitions or his betrayals. I was my own person, with my own path to forge. As I look back on that tumultuous time, I realize that the aftermath was not just about recovering from a betrayal. It was about rediscovering who I was and what I wanted out of life. It was about learning to stand alone, not as a victim, but as a survivor, ready to face whatever the future might hold.
It was just a regular evening when I came home. The weight of the long day at work was still fresh, and my tired feet could feel every step as I climbed up to our small apartment on the 3rd floor. The familiar scent of our home greeted me, and for a moment, I hoped for a quiet evening. But that hope was quickly shattered. As soon as I opened the door, I found Mark, my husband, lounging on the old brown couch. He had the remote in one hand and a half-empty beer in the other. The television was blaring some show or another, but Mark's focus shifted to me as soon as I stepped in. "Betty," he started, not even greeting me, "I want a pie tonight." I blinked in surprise. "Mark, I just got back from work and I'm really tired. Can we have it tomorrow instead?" He didn't look happy. "You're home now, aren't you? So make a pie. It's not that hard." I sighed. I remember my mother always said to be understanding and accommodating. But sometimes it felt like it was always me doing the accommodating. Nevertheless, I headed to the kitchen, deciding that making a pie might be the quicker route to peace. The apartment wasn't big, just a single bedroom, a living area combined with a dining space, and a small kitchen. I quickly gathered the ingredients, hoping to finish the pie as soon as possible. As I was rolling out the dough, Mark strolled into the kitchen. "Make sure it's apple, and none of that store-bought crust stuff." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We had store-bought crust, but I knew better than to use it now. I made the pie from scratch, just like he wanted. It took me a good hour to prepare everything. The aroma of the baking pie filled the apartment, and for a moment, everything felt cozy and right. I dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, this pie could be the start of a pleasant evening. But when the timer went off and I took the pie out, letting it cool on the counter, my hopes were dashed again. Mark was back in the kitchen, barely waiting for the pie to cool down before taking a big slice. After a few bites, his face contorted in displeasure. Without a word, he picked up the plate and threw the pie slice onto the floor, where it landed with a sad splat. "That was terrible," he spat out. I was stunned. All my efforts, all the care I put into that pie, and this was the reaction I got. Tears filled my eyes, but I tried to hold them back. "What was wrong with it?" I managed to ask. "Everything," he replied curtly. "You should know better." I didn't know what to say. I felt so small, so insignificant. The shattered pie on the floor seemed like a reflection of our relationship, broken and messy. Feeling defeated, I cleaned up the mess, the weight of years of unhappiness pressing down on me. It wasn't just about the pie, it was about everything. The lack of appreciation, the constant demands, the way Mark looked at me or didn't look at me. All of it. That night, I knew I needed a break. I couldn't stay in that apartment. I needed to be with someone who understood, someone who cared. That's why I turned to William, my brother. He had always been my rock. Grabbing my bag and leaving the mess behind, I decided to spend the night at his place. William's home was a cozy two-story building with a small garden in the front. I didn't even have to knock. He must have heard my car because he opened the door before I reached it, his face filled with concern. "Betty?" he started, pulling me into a comforting hug. "What happened?" Tears streamed down my face as I mumbled. "He threw the pie, Will. The pie I made after a long day at work. He just threw it on the floor." William led me inside, settling me on the soft couch in his living room. "Tell me everything," he urged, handing me a cup of hot tea. Sipping the warm drink, I began to recount the events of the evening. As I spoke, memories of the past also surfaced. "It wasn't just tonight, Will. It's been this way for years. I always thought things would change, that he would change. Remember when we first met at Jenna's party? He was so charming then." William nodded. "I remember. But Betty, people can put on a facade for a while, but their true colors always come out." "You know," I continued, "when we first got married, everything was great. We'd go on dates, laugh, talk for hours. But as the years went by, he changed, or maybe I just saw the real him." William's face tightened. "He didn't start off this way?" I shook my head. "No, we'd have our disagreements, but it was never like this. Over the years, he just became more demanding, more critical. I don't know when I started feeling like I was walking on eggshells around him." William sighed deeply. "You know, Mom and Dad had their issues, but Dad never treated Mom this way." "I know," I replied, tears forming again. I thought I could change him, make him see how hurtful he was being. But no matter what I did, it was never good enough. William looked at me seriously. "Betty, love doesn't work that way. You can't change someone who doesn't see a problem in their actions." I looked down, taking another sip of my tea. I remember when Mom and Dad would argue, but Dad would always apologize, always make up for it. Mark never does. There was a pause. Then William said, "Betty, you deserve better. Remember when we were kids? We promised each other we'd always be there. I'm here for you now. You need to think about yourself, your happiness." I nodded, taking in his words. The realization was growing within me. This wasn't the life I envisioned for myself. I deserved respect, love, and care. And it was clear I wasn't going to get that from Mark. "You're right," I finally admitted. "I can't keep living like this. It's time to make a change." William squeezed my hand. "I'll be with you every step of the way." The morning light filtered through the curtains of William's guest room. I stretched, feeling more rested than I had in a long time. The decision to divorce Mark had brought with it a mixture of relief and apprehension. Walking downstairs, I found William already up, making breakfast in the kitchen. "Morning, sis," he greeted with a warm smile. "Good morning," I replied, pulling up a chair at the dining table. He placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of me. "You need to eat. Big day today." I nodded, taking a bite. "I'm nervous, Will, but it's the right thing to do." He sat across from me, sipping his coffee. "It's never easy, but remember, you're doing this for yourself, and I'm right here with you." After breakfast, William drove me to the lawyer's office. As we parked, I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the steps ahead. Inside, we were greeted by Mrs. Harris, a stern-looking woman with sharp eyes. But as she spoke, her kindness shone through. "Betty, I understand this is a difficult time for you. My job is to guide you through the legal process and make sure your interests are protected," she said. "Thank you," I whispered, feeling grateful for her support. The meeting was long, filled with paperwork and legalities. Mrs. Harris explained everything patiently, ensuring I understood my rights and the process ahead. As the days turned into weeks, life became a whirlwind of appointments, meetings, and paperwork. Mark, to my surprise, remained silent throughout this time. He neither signed the divorce papers nor contested them. He simply seemed to have disappeared. This silence was unsettling. One evening, while sitting with William in his living room, I expressed my concerns. "It's strange, Will. Mark hasn't reacted at all. No calls, no messages, nothing. It's like he's vanished." William looked thoughtful. "It is odd, especially given how he was earlier, but maybe he realized his mistakes and wants to move on." "I hope so," I sighed, though a nagging doubt lingered. Life continued its pace. I started looking for a new place to live. I wanted a fresh start, a home where I could rebuild my life without the shadows of the past. After a few weeks of searching, I found a beautiful house. It was spacious, with large windows letting in plenty of light, a stark contrast to the dim apartment I had shared with Mark. I felt a connection the moment I stepped in. This was my new beginning. William was ecstatic when he saw the place. "It's perfect for you, Betty, a place to call your own." As we toured the house, I shared my plans with him. "I want to paint the walls light blue, maybe have some plants by the windows." He chuckled. "Always the planner. It sounds wonderful." Moving in was a joyous occasion. With the help of William and a few friends, the house quickly started to feel like a home. Every evening, after work, I'd return to my sanctuary, relishing the peace it brought. However, that peace was short-lived. One fateful evening, as I returned home, I found the front door ajar. A chill ran down my spine. Pushing the door open, I stepped in cautiously. The sight that greeted me was unexpected and alarming. There, in the living room, sat Mark. My heart raced as I took in the scene before me. Mark sat at my dining table, his belongings scattered around. A sense of violation washed over me. This was my space, my sanctuary, and he had invaded it. "What are you doing here, Mark?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up, his face showing a mix of smugness and defiance. "Well, it's our house, isn't it? We're still married, Betty. But I bought this house after we separated. It has nothing to do with you," I shot back. Mark sneered, leaning back in the chair. "Doesn't matter. As your husband, I have every right to be here." Just then, Anna, my au pair, walked in, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Betty. He showed me his ID and marriage certificate." He said he had every right to be here. I didn't know what to do. I sighed. It's okay, Anna. This isn't your fault. Turning my attention back to Mark, I said, You need to leave, Mark. This is my home, not yours. Mark chuckled. Think again, sweetheart. I'll be staying here. And if you try to kick me out, I'll make sure to claim half of everything in our divorce. The audacity of his claim left me reeling. I felt trapped, cornered in my own home. But I couldn't let him see my fear. I needed to be strong. Fine, I said, trying to sound calm. Stay tonight. But tomorrow, I'm getting a lawyer, and we'll see who has the right to be here. Mark smirked. Bring it on. I'm not going anywhere. Feeling defeated, I retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I needed to think, to come up with a plan. Grabbing my phone, I called William. Will, I said, tears forming. He's here, at the house. He says he has a right to it. William's voice was filled with anger and concern. Stay calm, Betty. I'm on my way. We'll sort this out. Hanging up, I tried to calm my racing heart. Mark's sudden reappearance and bold claims had taken me by surprise. But with William by my side, I felt a glimmer of hope. Within minutes, William arrived. I heard the two of them talking in hushed tones downstairs. The tension in the air was palpable. After what felt like an eternity, William came up to my room. Betty, he began, his face serious. There's something you need to know. When we bought this house, I made sure it was in my name. I had a feeling Mark might pull something like this. Legally, he has no claim to this property. A wave of relief washed over me. Thank you, Will. I don't know what I would do without you. He hugged me. We're family. We look out for each other. The next morning, armed with the property papers and William's unwavering support, I confronted Mark. Seeing the documents, he realized he had no ground to stand on. His smugness from the night before had disappeared. This isn't over, Betty, he hissed as he left. Days turned into weeks. With every passing day, the intrusion by Mark felt more like a distant memory, but the threat he posed remained. William and I, however, weren't about to sit idly by. One evening, as we sat in the living room, William looked at me with a seriousness I had seldom seen. Betty, I've been thinking. We need to be prepared for any moves Mark might make. He's unpredictable. I nodded. I've been feeling the same. But what can we do? William paused, taking a deep breath. I've hired a private detective. I wanted to know what Mark's been up to since the two of you separated. I looked at him in shock. A private detective? Will, is that necessary? William sighed. I just have this gut feeling. I want to make sure we have all our bases covered. I understood William's concerns. His protective nature was one of the things I cherished most about him. All right, I conceded. What did the detective find? William pulled out a folder from his bag. As he spread the photos and documents on the table, my heart sank. The pictures showed Mark with various women. Some looked familiar from our past life. One document caught my eye, a police report filed by a woman against Mark. He did this? I whispered, disbelief evident in my voice. William nodded gravely. It appears Mark's activities haven't been on the straight and narrow. This could be our leverage. If he tries to make any more moves against you, we can use this against him. I felt a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, betrayal. I can't believe he sunk this low. William put a reassuring hand on mine. We'll get through this, Betty. Together. A few days later, our preparation proved to be fortuitous. A letter arrived from Mark's attorney, making wild claims and threats about taking me to court for supposed shared assets and conjuring up fabricated tales about our life together. Reading the letter, my hands shook. But William, ever the pillar of strength, looked at me and said, We're ready for this, Betty. We've got evidence. He can't intimidate us. With William's support, we met with Mrs. Harris again. As she read through the letter and went over the evidence we had against Mark, her face remained unreadable. After a long pause, she finally said, We have a strong case here. Mark's claims are baseless, especially with the evidence we have. We'll counter this. Don't worry. Relief washed over me, but the idea of facing Mark in court was still daunting. William, sensing my anxiety, squeezed my hand. We've got this. I won't let him hurt you anymore." The countermove was set in motion. Mrs. Harris swiftly drafted a response, highlighting Mark's activities and questioning the credibility of his claims. The ball was now in Mark's court. Every day after that was a game of wait and watch. William and I spent many evenings going over the possibilities, preparing for any scenario. Through it all, William's unwavering support gave me the strength to face each day. It was a rainy Tuesday evening. William and I were watching a movie when the knock echoed through the house. With a look of mutual surprise, I went to open the door. Standing there was a woman, soaked to the bone, her eyes red from crying. "Are you Betty?" she asked, her voice shaky. I nodded cautiously. "Yes, who are you?" She took a deep breath. "My name is Jenna. I was involved with Mark." My heart skipped a beat. "Come in," I said, motioning for her to enter. Once seated, Jenna began her story. "I met Mark a few months ago. At first, he seemed charming, but soon he started showing his true colors. I heard about you, about his past, and I thought I should come and warn you." "Warn me?" I thought. What could be worse than what I already knew? Jenna continued, tears streaming down her face. "He became aggressive, possessive. He said things about you, about how you'd ruined his life, and he wanted revenge." William's face darkened. "What kind of revenge?" Jenna hesitated, looking down. "He talked about ruining you financially, said he had friends who could make it happen." The room was silent for a few minutes, the gravity of Jenna's words sinking in. Finally, William broke the silence. "We need to do something about this. We can't let him continue to terrorize people." I nodded in agreement, feeling a newfound determination. We need to expose him, let everyone know who he really is. Over the next few weeks, with Jenna's help, William and I gathered more evidence against Mark. From his financial misdeeds to his numerous affairs, the depth of his deceit became apparent. It wasn't just me he had hurt. There were others, just like Jenna. With everything we had, William suggested we go to the police. It's time he faces the consequences of his actions. Walking into the police station, I felt a mix of fear and hope. Would they believe us? Would they take action? Detective Rogers was assigned to our case. As we laid out our evidence, he listened intently, occasionally asking questions. Finally, after what felt like hours, he spoke. "This is substantial evidence. We'll investigate further, but from what you've shown, it's clear that Mark has been involved in illegal activities." The next few days were a blur. The police acted swiftly, arresting Mark on multiple charges. The news spread, and soon, the monster I had once called my husband was unmasked to the world. Months passed after the revelation. With Mark behind bars, I should have felt safer. And while there was certainly a sense of relief, there was also the constant fear of what Mark's friends might do, those he had often bragged about, who he said would always have his back. One day, as I was returning from work, I noticed something odd. My mail was scattered all over the porch, and the front door looked like someone tried to tamper with it. Panic surged. Could this be one of Mark's allies? I immediately called William. "Will, I think someone tried to break in." "Stay calm," he replied, his voice firm. "I'll be right over." I waited inside my car until William arrived. Surveying the scene, he confirmed my suspicions. "It looks like an attempted break-in. We need to beef up your security." Over the next few days, William and I worked on improving the safety of the house, installing security cameras and an advanced alarm system. One evening, as we were testing the systems, the alarm suddenly blared. Rushing to the monitor, we saw a man skulking around the property. But before he could make any moves, the local police, alerted by the security company, arrived and apprehended him. I felt a rush of gratitude towards William. His foresight had prevented another potential disaster. The next day, Detective Rogers called. "Betty, we've got the intruder in custody. He claims he was sent by Mark, but we're still confirming the details." This confirmed my worst fears. Mark was still trying to control and hurt me, even from jail. Days later, I got a call from Jenna. "Betty, there's something you should know." She hesitated before speaking. "Mark's been reaching out to people from prison. He's been trying to spread lies about you." I gritted my teeth. Thank you, Jenna. He won't get away with this. That evening, William had an idea. Betty, we need to turn the tables. We've got evidence, Jenna's testimony, and a lot more. Let's go public. The next week, with the help of William's contacts, we scheduled a press conference. The media turnout was massive, with numerous reporters eager to hear my side of the story. As I stepped up to the podium, my heart pounded. Hello, everyone. Today, I want to share my story, not just to expose Mark's cruelty, but to give hope to all those who've been in abusive relationships. I detailed everything, from our first meeting to the pie incident, to Jenna's revelations and the attempted break-in. As I spoke, the room was silent, every eye focused on me. When I finished, the questions began. Do you believe Mark is still a threat? I replied confidently. Yes, but I won't let him or anyone else intimidate me any longer. Another reporter asked, How do you feel about him now? I paused for a moment. I pity him. For someone to have so much hate, he must be truly miserable. After the press conference, the support was overwhelming. Messages poured in from all over, many from women sharing their own experiences. It was clear that by speaking out, I had ignited a movement. That evening, as I sat with William, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Thank you, Will. Today, I took back my power. William smiled warmly. You always had it, Betty. You just needed a little push. The next morning, William dropped by. Got some news, he said, a glint in his eyes. Remember the intruder? I nodded, recalling the fear of that night. How could I forget? Well, he began, the court has sentenced him, and with all the evidence stacked against him, he'll be locked up for a long time. Relief washed over me. That's good to hear. And there's more, he continued. Mark's been transferred to a high-security prison. With his recent antics and connections, he won't be coming out anytime soon. I hugged William tightly. Thank you for everything, for being there when I felt alone. William smiled. Family sticks together. Weeks turned into months, and life started to regain its rhythm. I reconnected with friends, started a support group for victims of abuse, and even began dating again. On my birthday, I held a small get-together. As I looked around at the faces, William, Jenna, my new friends, and old ones, I realized how far I had come. The wounds of the past were healing, replaced by the joy of new memories. Late into the night, as everyone left, William sat down next to me. You've done well, Betty. I looked at him, tears glistening. With a little help from my friends. He chuckled. Always.